Hey everyone, thank you for joining. A lot is happening in the world today, and um, and we got to cover this. So Elon Musk has been going mad, and I mean that in a good way. He's been going crazy in his new position at the Department of Government Efficiency, Doge, and he's been attacking this organization called USAID. Now, this is a lot more interesting than it sounds. You might have heard people talk about how some people are not going to get medication for HIV globally, or there's going to be various things that go wrong because of the stuff that Elon Musk cuts. But I want to show you that this is a much more nefarious thing than it seems. So, what we're going to do is Elon Musk just made a Twitter space called Doge and Mars. And we're going to listen to this and we're going to see what the analysis, I'm going to analyze it. And, but first, what I want to do is I want to introduce you to USAID. And I want to do this by way of reacting to a few short clips by someone named Mike Benz. And Mike Benz has done a great job of exposing what this organization does and what its real role is. I think a lot of people don't know. They think that this is an aid organization, a charity that helps the poor globally. That's how USAID is commonly perceived, but that is absolutely and fundamentally not what it is. In reality, it is an organization that carries out plans and organizes and creates infrastructure in foreign countries on behalf of the CIA and other intelligence agencies. And this is a very complicated web of things that have happened. And we're going to trace a lot of this stuff. And what we'll see is that this is not just the US government meddling in foreign countries' affairs. This is also people in the US government exerting power domestically. And this includes threats on politicians within the United States. And it includes misinformation campaigns in the United States. And there's a lot here that is going to be uncovered, not on the stream particularly, but we're going to just introduce you to this topic here on the stream. And there are lots of people who do in-depth research. So I recommend following Mike Benz and following the work that Elon is doing at Doge in order to be up to date on that. And we're going to cover this more. But before we go on, I just want to give a little bit of a disclaimer. I am a big fan of the United States. I'm an American. I want the United States to do well. I think there is a role for intelligence agencies. I think there is a role for these types of organizations who go out in the world and advance US interests. The thing is that we must, as a nation, always push ourselves to be the best. We need to hold ourselves to a very high standard. And I get that not the other countries play dirty and they do all this stuff too. But we are the leading power in the world. We don't need to hide behind overclassification, and we don't need to shroud everything we do in secrecy. We can simply, in public, advocate for our best interests and do so with honesty and transparency. Some things may need to be secret. The government may need to have some covert operations. These are all legitimate things, but these should be exceptions to the rule. We shouldn't have multi-billion-dollar operations that are entirely free from oversight. We need to do better. And ultimately, a system that's running in the way that this system is running is not sustainable. People will take advantage of it, as they already have. They will take advantage of it, and they will lose the American people's trust and their incompetence, because they are not being held accountable. The incompetence of those who do take advantage of this. And I'm not pointing fingers at anyone in particular, and I don't have much knowledge about this. I'm reacting to this just like you. But what I'm saying is that the incompetence exhibited by people who inevitably will grow complacent without oversight will lead to catastrophic failures that really harm Americans. And although it might be painful, we need to hold ourselves to the highest standards. And we need to I'm not against the types of things that people do that we're going to talk about, that these organizations do. I'm not categorically against them. I just want to push those organizations to be the best versions of themselves and the most ethically, transparently run, moral versions of themselves. And so that's my position. So with that, I want to introduce you to USAID as described by Mike Benz. So in order to do this, he actually is on Rumble. He does this show called, what's it called? The Censorship Industry Annotated on Rumble. And it's really awesome. It's a really in-depth show where he has sources for everything, and he shows you exactly where he gets the information live on stream. It's an amazing resource. So I recommend you check that out. But what I'm going to do here, because we're going to analyze Elon Musk's Doge presentation. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to first react to a few clips by Mike Benz just to set the stage so that you understand what USAID is. And then we're going to listen to Elon Musk's presentation about Doge. And then we're going to cover a few more clips from other creators just to kind of provide a little more context about the kind of stuff that's going on. So let's get into it. Okay, I'm going to bring this up. Okay, and so I will move my face so that you can see. Actually, no, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go full screen with this. Let's watch some clips by Mike Benz. All right, so let's watch this by now. Okay, so here the title of this is USAID, the ultimate nerve center of a rogue foreign policy establishment. This is what Mike Benz is claiming. Let's see what he says.
Should be a familiar picture to people who've been subbed for a while, where I've described the inside of the blob. Now, what's going on in this picture? For people who are new here or just to freshen up for folks who need a reminder. This describes our trifecta of foreign policy establishments. And again, foreign policy just means the American empire instead of the American homeland. We are an empire that stretches the globe. We must manage our empire affairs, our vassal states, our markets. And so we have three big agencies in the government that do that. And none of these agencies are allowed to operate at home. Those are the State Department for U.S. national interests, the Defense Department, the Pentagon, for national security, and our intelligence community, which provides covert or plausibly deniable assistance on national interest grounds or national security grounds. National security grounds meaning a military threat. National interest, if you remember, it's we want it, we got it. National interest means anything. Does it make us richer? Do we want it? Okay. Now, the part that I've left out of this to avoid confusion is a big old entity right in the middle of them. That entity is USAID.
I was pausing it just in case you didn't realize that he's putting USAID in the center of this diagram containing Department of State, Department of Defense, and the CIA.
Now, USAID was created in the early 1960s by President John F. Kennedy because the American empire had been tripping over itself for some time. Because when we set up the CIA in 1947 and we reframed the Department of War to the Department of Defense in 1947, and we began this creation, really expansion, dramatic expansion of the American empire abroad, outside. We had the DoD doing international development work, so to speak, for military reasons. We had the State Department doing international development work, if you will, humanitarian work, supporting local institutions for national interest reasons, and we, the CIA, doing its own thing. So they were all tripping over each other. The Pentagon, the State Department, and the CIA were all tripping over each other. There was no centralized agency to coordinate all the different reasons that we run money into foreign countries to influence the course of events in those countries. Again, they all face outward. They're supposed to. What is USAID? When people hear the name USAID, they focus on aid. They focus on thinking like it's humanitarian work. But aid is not actually in the name of USAID. USAID stands for the United States Agency for International Development, not aid. It's not a charity. And international development is simply capacity building.
Okay, so what kind of capacity are we going to build? Let's watch a little bit more of the types of things that Mike Benz is connecting to USAID. So here we have a video where he says that this is 10 times USAID got busted as a CIA front. So in essence, USAID is doing things. There's like all these organizations, these nonprofits. USAID is funding them and coordinating with them internationally. And sometimes, I'm not saying always, but at the very least, sometimes the CIA is pulling strings behind the curtain and is directing funds and directing resources and attention within USAID to fund various operations abroad that usually do things like regime change, or basically doing very meddling in other countries' business. Let's put it that way. Doing the types of things that the CIA does. And again, I'm not categorically against the US advocating for its interests, but I want this to be done in an ethical way. And I want this to be done in a sustainable way, so we don't get to some sort of CIA crisis that really endangers Americans. We need to fix the problems before they become real problems. So let's just look at this short thing where he cites specific evidence for times that USAID acted as a CIA front. Because I think it's important to establish that this is not just some humanitarian initiative that is that they put on by the US government. And we really ought not think of it that way. So let's play this video. And there's not going to be any talking. So if you're watching this visually, you can see the sources on the screen. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause it, and I will walk through each frame and explain to you the things that we're seeing in case you're listening to this, or if you just prefer to listen.
You are here, and so am I.
Okay, right here there is a Wikipedia. It seems like, or maybe this is some sort of article. You can't really read it, but it's saying that the CIA something is a front for CIA operations and operatives, and he has these logos overlaid on top of the text. So I think we're going to see other examples.
Maybe million.
Okay, this is a letter from John Holdridge, I'm not sure who that is, to Henry Kissinger. And in it says, US, and this was a secret letter. It says secret on it, but of course it's been declassified, so no worries about that. But it says, USAID funds are diverted to CIA for support of paramilitary effort in Laos. There's an example. This was in April 18th, 1972. Okay, now we have another article. So this says, foreign governments have long been accused. Sorry, I misread that. Foreign governments have long accused the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, of being a front for the CIA or other groups dedicated to their collapse. In the case of Cuba, they appear to have been right. In an eye-opening display of incompetence, the United States covertly launched a social media platform in Cuba in 2010. And they go on and talk about, basically there is a Cuban Twitter, and the article is Cuban Twitter, and the other times USAID pretended to be an intelligence agency. And so this is just more evidence of the USA doing the CIA's bidding. And of course, we're not going to read this article, but the implication is if you read it, you would see all the details of the types of espionage conducted on behalf of the CIA for USAID. Okay, there's another article called Covert Operations versus Public Health. What is the government thinking? It doesn't give any details here, but I'm sure that if you actually read this, you would gain more understanding about why this is an example of the USAID acting as a front for the CIA. Again, this is not to fully litigate this subject, but out of any creator I've ever seen, Mike Benz is the guy who has the most receipts. So I recommend that you go and check out his content, and you will see there is an abundance of documentation behind all of this stuff. This is not speculation. Okay, this is good. So the U.S. Agency for International Development sent young people undercover to Cuba to incite anti-government activism. Their cover was an HIV prevention workshop. Okay, this is very interesting. So people have been complaining now that USAID is being shut down, or at least temporarily shut down. They've been complaining that people are not getting HIV medication and that this is a humanitarian crisis. Well, it turns out that there is reason to believe that USAID was using these HIV prevention workshops as a means of, again, inciting anti-government activism and trying to overthrow the government in Cuba. So this says U.S. funding Afghan irrigation canals used in heroin production. So the opioid crisis stemming from Afghanistan, a lot of people have connected that to the CIA and State Department. I'm again reading this article. I'm sure you would find more details. Let's see. We just kind of skipped a frame there. It was really quick. Probably this is what they were talking about. So there's something called Zuneo. Zuneo was an online United States state-owned company, social networking and microblogging service marketed to Cuban users. This is probably the thing that we were just talking about, the Cuban Twitter. So I'm not going to spend time on this, but here is, if you want to read about it, look this up, Zuneo, and you can look up more about it. But clearly this was USAID affiliated. And so this was all, I think, a clip from this particular episode, Censorship Industry Annotated number 45. So again, if you're skeptical of this, realize the point of this stream is not to go over this, but rather to listen to Elon Musk's Doge presentation. If you want to know more about this, I recommend Googling this or searching it on Rumble, and you'll find Censorship Industry Annotated number 45. We'll probably have all the sources you need. I don't think there's much more context to... Yeah, there's nothing more here. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that USAID does. I think it's really important to understand that. So now that we have, there's more we could go into. And I do want to say, like, I think before we listen to the space, I want to say one more thing, that there's a lot of evidence that this has spilled over to affect us domestically. It's one thing to do this abroad, but when this starts affecting us domestically is when it really gets concerning, because basically you have an organization that acts with minimal to no oversight. And when they start affecting things domestically, that's in a sense hijacking the immunity power granted to the US government. And basically whoever is at the top essentially in theory, could steer it to do wrong. So we need to be very careful when these things spill over domestically. And Mike Benz has done a great job talking about how censorship efforts within the United States are affecting Americans. And this stuff, he claims, is driven by USAID. And this is a lot of the work that he's done. That's why his podcast or series on Rumble is called Censorship Industry Annotated, because he's actually really his primary target, although he focuses on USAID because they're the main culprit, or the main person who's the main organization that's perpetrating this, or at least one of the centerpieces of it. Really, his focus is on the censorship that is occurring on social media, the censorship to Americans. So Americans are getting content censored, and that's what his focus is. So that clearly affects us domestically. And I want you to just don't be political here, okay? This is not a partisan issue. This is just common sense. It is just a matter of fact that U.S. intelligence agents signed a letter talking about the fact that Hunter Biden's they claimed that Hunter Biden's laptop was Russian disinformation. That is a fact. That proved to be false. And that was hugely influential in the previous election, not this most recent one, but the one before that. That is maybe just one isolated incident of people in the intelligence agency meddling and using their credibility to sway election results. But if you follow the work of Mike Benz, you'll see that this is not an isolated incident. It's just something that we definitely know about. And just think about all of the opposition that Trump faced in his first term. Again, this is not ideological, this is not political, this is not partisan. I'm not saying that Trump is good. I'm not making any case whatsoever. This is something that everyone can agree with. Even if Trump deserved to be pushed out and face immense opposition, and if he was so bad that we ought to oppose him at every step of the way, it is still the case that the intelligence agencies and those affiliated with them worked against him. And there is something that should at least raise eyebrows when the elected president of the United States is being undermined by bureaucrats and employees of the government that were not elected. And when they decided that they needed to do something, there's something. I'm not saying that there's never a scenario in which they should not, it's never possible for someone that works for the government to do the right thing in disobeying someone who is elected. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying it should at least raise eyebrows and raise suspicion. The fact that they were able to mobilize an effort against Trump so intense and do what they did. And I don't want to get into that because I think that will maybe cloud some people's minds because they don't like Trump and they don't necessarily want to hear that. This is not just a problem that it's not just a problem that these organizations are going against Republicans. They're also going against Democrats. They're also going against independents. Really what we need to do is we have a lot of concerns, legitimate concerns from what we know. And what we want to do is we just want to look into this and learn more. So now let's listen to what Elon Musk has to say. So I'm going over here. You can, unfortunately, this isn't on YouTube, but this is on X. So if you go onto his X, you can find this Doge and Mars space, and you can play it. So I'm starting at 6 minutes and 30 seconds in because before that, it's all music. So I will just click play, and we will listen.
It's time for sleep.
Let's see. Senator Ernst, do you, Joni?
I am here. Yes, I'm here. Can you?
Coming through okay, Vivek? You're good there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you?
Cool. Excellent. Well, this is just a, spaces conversation. And it's not meant to be anything big or formal, just kind of an update. I've got little X here in the background. And we can also take some questions about Mars and other things if people are interested. All right. We're talking to people on the internet. So let's see. Well, first of all, it's obviously a tremendous honor to be working on Doge, and for this to be something that President Trump recognizes as important enough to include in his inauguration speech. It's worth noting that both Doge and Mars were in the president's inauguration speech, which is very notable because there's a very limited amount of things you can talk about in that speech, and both government efficiency and Mars were major, prominent elements of the inauguration speech and in the early executive orders as well. So meaning that President Trump takes improving government efficiency very seriously. Obviously, although it is a humorous name, ironically, I think Doge will have a very serious, very serious and significant impact on government waste and fraud and abuse, which is really astonishing in its scale and scope. And Senator Ernst actually has been working on this for, I think, perhaps more than a decade. I think a long time, and has uncovered many crazy things. So that's why I invited her to speak, as well as Vivek has been thinking about this for a long time. And maybe there'll be some others that come along. But there's already been really tremendous progress. A rough estimate is that there's at least a few $1 billion a day of savings. Now that may sound like a lot, but when you're talking about a federal spending that's $7 trillion, it's actually, we still need to do quite a bit better than we have thus far. Well, let's see. With that, perhaps Senator Ernst, it would be great for people to hear from you. I think not that many people have heard from you, and you've been spending more time on this than we have, and it'd be great to hear your thoughts on government waste and efficiency, and things that could be better, and maybe some anecdotes about some of the crazy things you've seen.
Yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize that it is cool, especially from Elon's perspective, the fact that at his inauguration, Trump did mention Mars, going to Mars, and the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, this is a really a big moment for U.S. tech, and even not just like beyond Elon, also having Zuck there and Bezos and Sundar and just everyone at the top of the big tech companies sitting up there with the Trump coalition. That was a super powerful moment in terms of tech dominance. And this is something that we've covered in the past. We've reacted to Balaji Srinivasan's talk, Silicon Valley's Ultimate Exit, where he talks about how tech is essentially replacing the DC establishment. And he puts each tech institution up alongside the ones that are in Washington and like East Coast, like New York, and stuff like that. And he shows how this is kind of like a new power center in the United States that's slowly taking over. And this really, I think, is a tipping point for that thesis. So shout out to Balaji for getting another prediction spot on. Anyway, let's listen to what Joni has to say.
Hopefully you can hear me.
It's funny that there's always technical details, technical difficulties. I mean, on whenever there's a space. Might have lost her, unfortunately. Like, you'd think that they would fix this by now. But
let's see, Vivek, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, man. You hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Perhaps you'd like to say a few things.
One thing that I'm listening for when I hear this conversation is I'm trying to understand how is the rapport between Elon and Vivek. There's a lot of rumors that they are not getting along or didn't get along. Vivek departed Doge. He's now running for governor of Ohio. So I haven't sensed any animosity or anything, but it's certainly there. I'm looking for undertones of this. So if in the comments, if you do sense that, if you have any idea what's going on, please let me know.
Two things.
Yeah, I mean, it was cool to lay the foundation for the first couple of months. You've been kicking ass in the last couple of weeks, and it's been funny to watch the public processing of this, which is basically on the side of eliminating waste, fraud, abuse from the government. And, the basic idea of a democracy is that the people we elect to run the government should be the ones who actually make the laws in Congress.
Exactly.
And the bureaucrats have no place in doing it. And so, I guess my question for you is 2 weeks in now, the thing we're taught is that we have 3 branches of government, not 4.
Right.
What's your experience now 2 weeks in? Is there actually a 4th branch of government?
There most definitely is. And this is actually really what Vivek's saying is really goes to the heart of the problem. In order for us to be a true democracy, a functioning democracy, the government must be responsive to the people. That's literally what democracy means. However, when you have a vast unelected bureaucracy that is not answerable to the public, and where if the elected officials, if the president, the people in Congress and the Senate actually don't have, if they don't have the power to affect the bureaucracy, and it's actually extremely difficult to affect the bureaucracy, then you do not have rule of the people. You do not have democracy. You have rule of the bureaucracy. And this is obviously wrong. It is unconstitutional. And it is imperative, therefore, that we return power to the people of the country and not have tyranny of the bureaucracy, which we most definitely have had to fall out to a degree that is absurd. As Vivek said, this it's not just that there's an unconstitutional 4th branch of the government, but it is arguably the most powerful branch of the government. Joni, I see you're back. Would you?
Yes.
Yeah, before we go on, I just want to comment on this. So in case some people don't know this idea, there's this thing called the deep state. It's a concept where essentially you think of the government as the people who were elected. So those are the people who, like the president or a senator or someone who you know about, and you have told them, okay, we choose you because you've put forth a vision and we voted on you to run this institution. And then that person will then go and in turn put heads of various departments. So for example, Marco Rubio is going to be the Secretary of State under Trump. I don't know, was he confirmed or not? Probably he was at this point. And so this is someone who it was confirmed by Congress, so there was oversight, and he's now running a department in an important role, and he wasn't elected, but he was nominated by the person who was elected, and this is under the microscope, so to speak. So this is how we think of the government. We think who is in charge, who is running the government. That is what we think of. We think of the elected officials and the people who they nominate to run various departments. But in reality, that's not actually how it works. That's not how government is implemented. Government is implemented by government employees. And government employees are, in some cases, unionized. In some cases, there's a lot of employment law that protects their rights. There's all kinds of things that make them almost insulated from the government itself. And they also are, in a sense, a special interest group. And so furthermore, it's just the entire scale of the US economy and political system is so vast that we would never be able to actually go through and understand who is running everything. It's just too much for any one person to pay attention to. That's why we only pay attention to who is at the top. The problem is that we may know who's at the top, but the people at the top only have so much time and energy, and they can only do so many things, and they're lacking a lot of information. So they depend on people below them in order to do things. And they delegate authority to those people, and those people act autonomously because that's how it should be and that's how it has to be. But the government employees, the existing government employees, exercise effectively 99% of the authority that goes through the system. Now, if there's a very important thing, yes, the president will personally intervene and do all that, and he can override it. It's true in a lot of cases. Sometimes he can't even override it, but in a lot of cases, that's true. But there is just, it's like if these people are out to achieve something, they will be able to achieve it by 1,000 cuts. You can think of this thing, death by 1,000 cuts. A bunch of people working with exercising their power in a decentralized way within the system, not decentralized in a good way, decentralized in a bad way, meaning within the apparatus of the US government, but it's a decentralized effort of people in that apparatus so that you cannot pin it on one person. Each entity and subgroup and sub special interest group within that blob, so to speak, will be acting according to their own interests. And there's a lot of good people. I'm not saying that it's all a bunch of only people that are only self-interested. I'm not at all saying that. But it is a thing where basically, if these people do not go along with what the people at the top say, the people that are actually employed by the government, that are implementing the law 99% of the time, they are going to exert the most control. And so what happened when Trump came into power the first time is that these people were very much at odds with him. And this was one of the first times where we could plainly see that the US president was not actually the leader of the government. And you can say that's a good thing, but I don't think that you can say that conceptually the idea of the US president not being the leader is a good thing. Like you can say in this case it worked out, you can say that, but it's hard to argue that there's no downside to having a special interest group with a mind of its own that doesn't listen to what the outcome of democratic elections. It's hard to argue that that's a good thing. And that's the concern. The concern is that there is a deep state. The state you think of as Trump or Biden and Kamala or whoever was elected. That's what you think of as the state. The deep state is below that. It's like, you know how you see that meme with the iceberg and then it goes very deep, right? What is below the iceberg? What are all the people making all these small decisions? Like, who do you prosecute? Who should you investigate for a crime? What should we fund? What should we go after? Like, where do we direct these funds? How do we do this? How do we do that? How do we regulate? All these things. All the people who decide those things on a day-to-day basis hold a lot of power, and they do have an interest group and they act as a coordinated block of people. And we see that this can diverge from the will of the duly elected government, and that's why people are so concerned. So anyway, that's the concern. And that's why Vivek was saying there's a fourth branch of government. It's the employees of the government. And there's a lot of good people and a lot of naive good people, and there are some bad people. And it's a complicated system. So let's see how Elon is able to cut through.
Can you hear me now?
I can, yes.
Yep.
I apologize, gentlemen. Yes, it hopped to my laptop. So, I've been working on this for, as Elon said, over a decade now with my Squeal Awards, and there are many in Congress that actually really do care about this.
Absolutely.
The problem, I think, is there are not enough of us
Yes.
that have paid attention to this. And so while I highlight a lot of the abuses, and you wanted some anecdotes, Elon, and I've shared a number of those with
Well,
you
you've
and
got some zingers,
Vivek.
so it's like I think if the
Oh,
public just like
oh,
it's hard to resonate. It's hard for the public to resonate with statistics because it's sort of like, but people can really resonate with powerful anecdotes.
oh my
And
gosh.
Yeah.
More
So,
technical difficulties,
do we lose again? Hopefully
par for the
not.
course with streams, with what's it called?
I
Spaces,
mean,
not streams.
Oh
Joni had a
yeah.
bunch of them. Yeah, you had a
Y-
bunch of them, Joni.
Yeah, I did. So, sending kitties to spas to find out whether they produce less fur balls, heck up less fur
Really?
balls. So, yeah, we've spent taxpayer money on that. We put shrimp on a treadmill to see how fast they run. I'm sorry, but, all of these things, while they may be fun, why are we spending taxpayer dollars on them? And it
Right.
goes to the point of we've sent millions of dollars to China to study what? COVID.
Well, yes.
We saw how that
Yes.
ended.
Well, in fact, it's pretty outrageous that the the COVID um, the virus was developed in what is like a lab in Wuhan, and yet was funded by U.S. tax dollars,
Hmm.
which was simply routed through this sort of fake nonprofit EcoHealth,
Hmm.
because the government, the U.S. government can't give directly to China, so they just gave to EcoHealth, knowing that it would go to China. So our U.S. tax dollars were used effectively to, in the end, kill Americans, which is insane.
Absolutely insane. And I know, Elon, you have been on USAID. You
Yes,
have really, and so
that's the
this
hornet's nest for sure.
this was another one.
So I think there's a few separate issues here. I think she's going to say a lot of interesting stuff. So I want to just kind of parse this out. There is just general government waste, fraud, and abuse, which is is pervasive across many places within the government. And then there is USAID. These are there is also waste, fraud, and abuse within USAID, but there's also without it. There is also that outside of it. So I'm not sure if USAID was funding those types of studies. I'm not against science being funded by the government. I think we could have like a debate about how much that should be funded and what type of things should be funded. That the stuff she mentioned is doesn't sound super objectionable to me, but it is funny, and it is almost something where if it was a one-off example, you would laugh it off and say, "Oh, that's hilarious. We did that, haha." But when you do end up getting so many of these examples, I do think it is concerning. And I don't think that the way that they describe the connection between Wuhan, EcoHealth Alliance, and all of that, I don't think that was a super compelling narrative. Okay, so USAID might have funded some research, gain of function research, and perhaps that was linked to the coronavirus. That's not the same thing as USAID killing Americans. I think that was a stretch, but with that said, that was how he explained it. And I don't think that he is as deep in the weeds as some other people. And again, if you follow Mike Benz and you follow some of these other experts that actually trace this money, there are some interesting and very questionable connections. So I just want to, if anyone was skeptically listening to that, I want to just say, don't, sometimes people just speak off the cuff. They don't have their sources in order, and they're just kind of riffing, and sometimes it's hard to know what to say. And I do that, especially on this stream, I'm doing that. So the thing is I would just caution people from dismissing claims as if they're unsubstantiated. This is worth exploring and keeping an open mind about what's going on here. Just listen to what these people have to say. They've gotten close to it, they've seen it, and they are shocked by it. So, and now they're coming to on an X space, an unscripted X space, and trying to explain their position. Sometimes it doesn't come out very eloquently. So anyway, let's continue listening.
One of my efforts.
Yes.
And this began years ago when we were trying to figure out what they were doing with our American taxpayer dollars that were going to support humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. So I wanted to know exactly how those dollars were being spent. And
Right.
And I do want what she's going to say next is going to be very important. So I'm just going to pause this so I can say this one other thing. Like, this is also very much connected to Ukraine and the Ukrainian war. And there are some very concerning connections between the organizations that USAID has funded and the coup in Ukraine that occurred many years ago, and also the most recent invasion of Ukraine and the U.S. response to it. This is all interconnected. Not the point of this stream, but again, Mike Benz, he's the guy. Like, if you have one thing to take away from this, is Mike Benz has the receipts. But let's keep listening, because I want to see what Elon is focused on, and what Joni is going to say is going to be pretty shocking, actually. So, when she says it, it's not even received with the gravity that it ought to be received with. So let's just keep listening. But I just wanted to make you guys aware that there is a lot to be said for this Ukraine connection as well.
not
A
just in,
reasonable request.
yes, oh my gosh. And I shared this with you earlier, Elon.
So what she's saying is she was requesting information about what was going on with USAID and Ukraine. And Elon just said it was a reasonable request. And she's saying that they pushed back on it. But anyway, let's keep listening.
Just privately, but we got all kinds of threats from USAID because I was trying to exercise my oversight capacity in Congress.
Okay, like, I want to make sure that you just heard what a sitting senator of the United States of America said. Let's listen to that one more time. This is beyond unacceptable. Like, this is shameful. Let's listen.
So
I mean,
they
that's just shocking.
heck up less
Really?
furballs. So yeah, we've spent taxpayer money on that. We put shrimp on a treadmill to see how fast they run. I'm sorry, but
Sorry,
all of these things,
the
while they may be fun,
controls on X
why are we
are
spending
not good.
taxpayer dollars on them? And it
Right.
goes to the point of, we've sent millions of dollars to China to study what? COVID.
Well, yes,
We saw how that
yes.
ended.
Well, in fact, it's pretty outrageous that the COVID the virus was developed in what is a lab in Wuhan, and
I'm just speeding this
and
up
yet
to back to
was
where we
funded
were.
by U.S. tax dollars,
Mhm.
which was simply routed through this sort of fake nonprofit EcoHealth,
Mhm.
because the U.S. government can't give directly to China, so they just gave to EcoHealth, knowing that it would go to China. So our U.S. tax dollars were used effectively to, in the end, kill Americans, which is insane.
Absolutely insane.
Let's listen to what she
And
said here.
I know, Elon, you have been on USAID. You
Yes,
have really, and so
that's the
this
hornet's nest for sure.
this was another one of my efforts.
Here we go.
Yes.
And this began years ago, when we were trying to figure out what they were doing with our American taxpayer dollars that were going to support humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. So I wanted to know exactly how those dollars were being spent, and
Right.
not
A
just in,
reasonable request.
yes, oh my gosh. And I shared this with you earlier, Elon, just
Here we go.
privately, but we got all kinds of threats from USAID because I was trying to exercise my oversight capacity in Congress.
So a U.S. senator was asking questions, trying to have oversight, exercise her oversight capacity. A U.S. senator got threats from people within USAID. They said, "Oh, you're looking into us? Don't do that. We will do X, Y, or Z thing to you." That's what a threat is. That is beyond inappropriate. That is absurd. That is absurd. That is like the worst case Hollywood depiction of government gone rogue. Intelligence agencies subjected to minimal and fake oversight, which we'll get into how the oversight is fake on them, are threatening sitting elected representatives in the US government. And specifically, it would be bad under any context, but they are doing this when the senator is exercising oversight over them. So if someone tries to rein them in, they threaten them. Like, there's nothing you can say to me, Democrat, Republican, any sort, no matter what your ideology is, there's nothing that you can say to me that would ever justify that. That should raise alarm bells. And unfortunately, as we'll talk about later in this video, this is not a one-off thing. Not, oh, maybe she's just a liar. Maybe she just makes this up. No, there is a lot of examples of stuff like this. And it's concerning that we have people that have jobs that are taxpayer funded. They have authority delegated to them by the US government across a variety of different agencies. And that these people who have no term limits and are given authority, and in fact, their authority increases over time as they increase in seniority. And these people are placing threats against sitting US Congress people and possibly even the president himself, as we'll see later. So again, I can't understate that this is such a bombshell. Like this is like, the fact that she would just say this is shocking. This is a shocking revelation. Let's hear what they have to say. Because unfortunately, they don't spend a lot of time fixating on that. And I understand if you're threatened, maybe you don't want to talk about that too much, because maybe there's some points of vulnerability in there. But when we hear these signals, when people are kind of telling us something and they're not making a big deal out of it, but they're like, oh yeah, by the way, I was threatened. We need to know when to pay attention and when to listen. And this is one of those moments where we are being hinted, hey, by the way, that was kind of weird. Do you know what I just said? We're not going to make a big deal out of it, but I was threatened. That's crazy. That is literally crazy. Okay, so let's keep listening, though. Let's listen to what they have to say.
So they.
I mean, that's just shocking. I mean, it's
No, but he did say that's
how.
shocking.
I mean, honestly, it's outrageous that a taxpayer-funded organization would.
It's not even the fact that it's taxpayer funded. If that was the liquor store on the corner threatening them, that's still crazy. And it's like, especially if it was the liquor licensor manager person, right? And the liquor store was threatening them. That is so not okay. That is so not okay. It doesn't matter that it was taxpayer funded. I mean, that makes it worse because it's like we're paying for this, but still.
Threaten a U.S. senator who is simply trying to figure out if American taxpayer money is being spent correctly and not fraudulently.
Yes. And so what my staff and I had estimated was that 30 to 40% of the USAID's awards would go to indirect costs. So their overhead, their rents,
That's
employees,
a hell
things
of a
like
rent.
that.
Ooh,
Oh,
what are they
so,
living in? The Taj
but
Mahal?
hey, but
And so now would be a good time. I want to bring in one more resource. Let me see if I can pull this up in a smart way. I want to show you another resource. So I'm going to switch this view here. Okay. So one thing that Mike Benz is talking about here, I'm just trying to pull this up. Oh, where was this? So they're talking about how, okay, they were spending an absurd amount of money on rent. And so this raises a lot of questions, like 30 to 50% of their money was going on to operational costs. So let's say they want to provide HIV medication to people globally. Let's say that was their true goal. You would expect a lot of those costs to be related to the actual HIV medication and all of that kind of stuff. You wouldn't expect it to be on, for example, rent and offices and employees and that kind of thing. You would expect the labor to be a relatively small portion of the pie and the basics. And then you would expect them to have like a very efficient machine for deploying this aid. Like let's make some more simple example. Let's take just foreign aid as an example. Let's say we were doing foreign aid through the State Department, okay? And we were going to give some country $10 million. Now, there's a cost to administering that. So there is, someone needs to sit in an office, they need a computer, they need to be paid full time, they need to monitor the situation and check in and generate reports. So maybe that costs I mean, of course, these things all cost a lot more, but let's say that costs $1 million for the administration of aid. And yet that would only be 10% of the budget, because if you have $10 million for aid, then 1 million is the cost of administering it. That would even be very high for only $10 million of aid. But let's say you have $1 million for administering it, and then the other 9 million would go to, or maybe we can say even billion, right? We could say 9 point something billion dollars can go to some other country, whereas 1 million would be the cost of administering it. That's a reasonable-ish thing. I don't know if those numbers actually make sense, but you get the point. You don't expect the money you're deploying to be mostly going to the people administering it. It's not like a payday for the humanitarians. It's not just, let's just give them a payday. It's like we're trying to have these people who are effective at deploying capital. And unfortunately, what she is claiming in that segment just now is that 30 to 50%, I believe is the number she gave, was going to operational expenses, including very high rent. Like they paid a lot for renting buildings. And what she'll reveal later is it actually was north of 50%, which is crazy. That's an extremely inefficient way to deploy capital. But this is a point that Mike Benz made. He says, I still feel like people don't fully get this. The reason there is so much graft and waste at USAID isn't because they all just suck at their job and the money gets lost. The money getting lost is the reason to run ops out of USAID, since USAID usurped the CIA's old role. And what he does is he links to a video that explains the shell game that the CIA used to play back in the 60s and 70s, or I guess 60s, where they would create a bunch of shell corporations and nonprofits, and they would use that to launder money and then basically reroute money towards various aims. And so what we're going to get into after this is we're going to cover a really interesting story that involves blackmail of a US politician, and it involves CIA raising money through illicit means by extorting a politician in order to pay for an operation that couldn't be financed by the government, because essentially the CIA has a limited budget and all that money is spoken for. And when they want to do certain things, they need to get money in order to finance those types of things. And so a big part of this is finding ways of extracting money from individuals in the private sector and then money laundering it and then using it for whatever purpose they want. So we're going to get to that at the end of this. But this is something that Mike Benz was pointing out. And I really wanted to say when we're talking about, oh, they spent extra money on rent, haha, that is sinister. That's sinister. Do we know exactly what they're up to with it? Not necessarily. But honestly, these types of organizations should be beyond reproach. It should just be, it should be there. They shouldn't fail audits. They shouldn't resist audits. They should want to be audited. They should want efficiency. That if they were acting in our best interests, that's the way that they would act. So let's continue listening to what they have to say. I just wanted to point that out. It's not just that they're paying too much for rent and that's where the problem ends. It's not just waste. It's actually there are things going on behind the scenes that the money is being funneled into. Covert operations, so to speak. Okay, let me switch this view back to this. Okay, let's continue listening.
Vivek, okay, but get this. But okay, after months and months and months of obstruction where USAID wouldn't let us in, they told us the NICRA, the negotiated indirect cost rate agreements. It's a lot of government jargon, but anyway, the indirect cost. They said that the database, it doesn't exist. That was a lie. That was a lie. It was false because we found it, and then we were told we weren't allowed to.
I mean, the audacity of that. Having a database and congressional oversight wants Congress exercising their oversight capacity wants to look at it, and you don't even refuse, you say it doesn't exist. And that it is a lie.
To access the database. And then that's when Congressman McCall and I came together and we launched an official congressional investigation so that we could gain access to the rates.
Wow.
And then after about 6 more months of negotiations, then my staff was finally allowed to access very limited data. They were allowed to go into a room and they couldn't take notes. They were on camera the whole time. They couldn't remove any of the information. But what my staff found is you were laughing at that 30 to 40% because that is outrageous. That was understated.
What?
In some of the cases, the NICRA rates were upwards towards anywhere from 50 to 60%. And that doesn't include the cost for subcontractors, what the subcontractors were adding on. So this is the problem with USAID. And that's why, Elon, I'm with you on this
Thank you.
because so much of that taxpayer money is not even going to, we love to feel good about helping starving children and name your country, but it's not going there. It's
It's not.
going
That's
to
a
pay
total
rents
lie.
in Paris.
Yes,
It's
exactly.
going to support somebody's fancy dinner to
100%.
entertain whoever.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, to be clear, in shutting down, which we're in the process of doing, shutting down USAID, the reason for that, as opposed to simply, trying to do some minor house cleaning, is that as we dug into USAID, it became apparent that what we have here is not an apple with a worm in it, but we have actually just a bowl of worms.
Okay, I'm going to pause it here because I also wanted to talk about something else that Joni Ernst said. So basically, they were keeping a lot of this information secret. Now, she didn't go into the exact mechanisms and the legal arguments that they had for this, but it appears to me that this was classified information they were talking about. So there were staffers that worked with her, and I'm assuming that they were accessing classified information. They had a clearance. And so they had to go into a secure, I think they call it a skiff or whatever it's called. It's a secure room where they were not allowed to take notes and not allowed to record anything, etc. And they were able to, in that context, in that very controlled, monitored context, audit and the information and just make sure it checks out. And then when they leave, the only evidence they have is their personal testimony. But basically, digging into what USAID is doing, I mean, look, I could be wrong about some of the details of this, but it appears like that this is classified information. And there is a huge problem with overclassification. Does this need to be literally classified? Classified information should be very few and far between, because basically what it does is it shields people from accountability. And if we want to be the best versions of ourselves, I want the CIA, I want the FBI, I want all of these people to be the best agents they can be and to serve their country in the way they want to. But if they don't have oversight, if they don't have feedback from the people and the government, they're going to lack the information they're going to lack the information, and therefore they're going to lack the capability of doing that. So I want them to be set up for success. So I think this is a very bad thing. And essentially the problem is we classify information, anything that could make anyone in the government look bad, it gets classified. And so in a way, it's a shield against accountability. And now look at this. Now this Congress is trying to audit it, but it's classified. And they now have a limited capacity to even dig into it. So it's amazing that Elon has actually been able to go in and get a team of engineers to parse this systematically and disentangle and see what is actually happening, because this is not something that Congress was able to do. And one other thing I want to say is there is an objection that a lot of people will say that we need classified information to ensure national security and to ensure that we are one step ahead of our enemies abroad. And again, I agree theoretically with that. I'm not against the idea of classified information. But the issue is that if you think about it, there's not a reason why a lot of things ought to be classified. Let's say that you and I are going to fight. and I'm very good at fighting. Like, let's say that I'm like Khabib or someone, right? Some really good MMA fighter, and you are just some dude on the street, okay? I will destroy you. I will destroy you. You don't stand a chance against me. So if you know my plan, that doesn't matter. See, the US does not need to rely on tricks to win. We don't need like God, look at that. You didn't expect that. Oh, you didn't know this. We don't need that. We can just literally win. So like go and look up Gordon Ryan Jiu-Jitsu and watch his matches. He will go against people and he will write down and put it in a box and say, this is how I'm going to beat them. And then they're going to open the box afterwards, and they're going to see that he did this final move on them that he predicted. And now if you do jiu-jitsu, you know that that's very hard. He is very dominant. He's very good. And he basically can work his way with you. So anyone who goes against him, it doesn't matter if they know what his moves are. He will beat them because he can, because he's better. The United States similarly is in an extreme place of dominance, both economically and militarily. We don't need that many secrets. I'm not saying we need no secrets. Let's have some secrets. But the fact that like so many things are classified, so many random things, just like this meeting and this and that, and what USAID is doing here, all this stuff is classified. That's not needed. That is so not needed. It's ridiculous. All it does is it just enables the worst things to prosper inside of these agencies. Instead of, I think the people in these agencies want to do the right thing. So we could empower them by actually giving them transparency and unburdening them from this regime of overclassification. So anyway, let's continue listening.
And so at the point at which you don't merely, like if you've got an apple and it's got a worm in it, maybe you can take the worm out. But if you've got actually just a ball of worms, it's hopeless. And USAID is a ball of worms.
Mm-hmm.
There is no apple. And when there is no apple, you've just got to basically get rid of the whole thing. That is why
No,
it's got to go. You know,
So,
it's beyond repair. So yeah.
well,
There's a solution to this, which is that let's say something's cut that the people of this country just demand needs to exist again. It can always be voted back into existence by Senator Ernst and her colleagues.
100%.
And
Totally.
the fact that isn't going to happen reveals
Exactly.
exactly why many of these agencies, really, deletion is the only answer that's left.
Well, yes. Well
It's
said,
beyond
Vivek.
time to do
That's
it.
exactly
Yeah.
right. If it turns out we really need such an organization in the future, we just create it. Problem solved.
By the people.
Yes,
Yeah.
by the people, answerable and answerable to the people and to the people's elected representatives.
Mhm.
That is the way that government is supposed to work.
That I agree, and more transparency.
Yes.
Sunshine is the best disinfectant out there.
And they hate
And
sunshine. That tells you something.
yes. So, we need to be able to exercise our oversight, and this is where we have been blocked so long in Congress. I mean, you can go onto my official website on the internet.
Yep.
You can look through my priorities, go to my squeal area. You can go back. I've got the last several years on there of efforts, whether it's USAID, NIH, the National Institutes of Health, those taxpayer dollars that were going to China's Wuhan Institute of Virology, SNAP overpayments through USDA and the states.
Yep.
I mean, you name it. Just even my back to work, uh, my back to work report,
Yep.
the out of the office that we've talked so much about.
Yes.
And on day one, the president came in and said, "Hey, everybody back to work."
Yeah.
I don't think most Americans understand that only 6% of our federal workforce shows up to work in the office every single day. Only 6%.
Yes,
And
absolutely. It's truly insane. In fact, one of the most insane things I've seen was that I was speaking with hopefully our soon-to-be Attorney General Pam Bondi, and she was telling me that the U.S. engraving is actually, I guess, which used to be the U.S. Mint, which is actually a building that is an historic building, actually a beautiful building, it's here in D.C. and the windows are all broken and is turned into a homeless encampment. That means like this, nobody,
Oh,
it's somebody like this. No one comes to work to such a degree that this beautiful building has all the windows broken and is turned into a homeless encampment in downtown DC. That's how absurd it is. It's beyond belief.
yeah, and that's why so many of these buildings, if we could repopulate them, that would be great. And that
Yes,
way we can have oversight and make sure employees are doing what they're supposed to do. I'm going to hammer on USAID one more time.
absolutely. Well, they
Um,
deserve it.
yeah, so we talk about the locality pay abuse, and that's what happens when people aren't working in the office. What they're doing in DC, and not everyone. I don't want to accuse every
Sure.
federal worker of being a bad actor, but I
Of
have
course.
seen so many examples of this. We had a USAID employee that was falsely using an office supply retailer's mailing address. Think like
Yes.
Staples and places like that. Using that address in Virginia to defraud the taxpayers by claiming higher Washington, DC locality pay, but they were actually living in another state full time. And they,
So, in other words, they're claiming to be in person. They're claiming, or at the very least, they're saying, I live in this expensive city that is like they want you to ideally live in. But what they did is they just paid somebody to have an address, to use their address, and they didn't actually live there. And they, in the meantime, they like lived somewhere else that was cheaper and far away. And yeah, let's keep listening.
had the full knowledge and assistance of their supervisor in pulling off this scam.
So she's saying that this was something that was, it's not that, of course, you will always find someone cheating the rules, but she's saying that there was some institutional buy-in here. And this probably was a pervasive thing, not just a one-off instance. And in this case, it was not just people doing this without the knowledge of other people in the organization. It was basically something that was implicitly sanctioned by those running the organization. So it's just another example of how certain people felt that they had a license to basically bend the rules, because in some sense, this is what you would expect when nobody's going to come looking. And if they do, we will threaten them. Whoever's going to come look, we're going to threaten them. If that's your mentality and you think that that's going to work, which it won't, because it always fails in the end. But if that's your mentality, then that's what you would do. Maybe some people would, for sure.
And
Wow.
then
Okay.
the IG, the USAID IG.
IG stands for Inspector General. So this is someone whose job it is to inspect and do internal reporting and investigations into problems in an organization. So she's talking about the USAID IG, the person who's responsible basically for investigating problems in USAID and providing oversight. So she's going to talk about what he did or was going to do, etc. So let's listen to what she's saying.
Blew off my request for an investigation.
What did they give? That seems complete. I mean, how can they do that? This is
They can.
how
And
can they do
see,
this? It's
this is the problem we have, is that there are checks and balances in place where we can write letters all day and we can request IG oversight. But if that IG says, I'm not going to investigate, I'm not interested, I, as a United States Senator, don't have the power to force them to do it. And this is why I'm so excited that we have Doge and that we have a president that's willing to back
yes,
us up.
absolutely. So really, none of this could be done without the full support of the president. With regard to the USAID stuff, I went over it with him, in detail, and he agreed with that we should shut it down. I mean, that's I want to be clear. That's I actually checked with him a few times. Said, are you sure? I'm like, yes. And so we're shutting it down. And yeah, it's also incredibly politically partisan, and has been supporting radical left causes throughout the world, including things that are anti-American, which is insane.
So one thing I think is really important, and if you hear what Joni Ernst is saying, that she's thankful that Elon and Trump are going after USAID. And the reason why I think this is very important for lawmakers is because their hands are to some extent tied. And they can, I mean, she's talking about how she was threatened by them. So how can she exactly exercise oversight upon them when they're threatening her? And when, even if she manages to win against them, then they can completely hamper her investigation and make her jump through all kinds of hoops, delay things. Their inspector general won't even actually investigate it. And basically, she has some staffers who can go into a room and read a few things and then come out without any evidence. And that's the most she can do. How is she supposed to fight back? And how are other people who are in Congress able to basically make changes to the system? If the people of the United States vote a certain way and they want to enact certain changes in the government, the elected representatives will get there, and then they won't be able to implement this because there is a special interest group that is threatening them and resisting their oversight and resisting basically complying with whatever they tell them to do. They are running this deep state, so to speak, is making its own rules, and they're willing to go after anyone who is a challenge to them. So I think what could potentially happen here is that there could be a bit of a flywheel effect where, as these organizations get disempowered, it is possible that then this frees up Congress people to actually join the fight against those elements in the US government that are corrupt. And so right now, everyone is scared. They're scared of what will happen to them and who's going to come out against them and the institutional power that will be thrust against them if they stand up against the system. But a lot of these people, they want to stand for change. They just know that they can't do it. They know that they're going to be taken out, they're going to be smeared, and they're going to be ruined if they do it. And they know that maybe they can fight for some kind of marginal win for their constituents, but they're going to get nothing if they go against the system. And so why would you go against the system if, when you do that, ultimately you don't achieve your goal and you just get kicked out of power? You didn't even get that marginal win. So, and it basically will set back your district. It'll set back the people who voted for you, and you weren't going to make a difference anyway. So, but when you now have two branches of government, you have the Senate and Congress on one end, and then you have the executive branch also reinforcing their oversight and working with them and exerting executive power, which in this case is a lot more effective at least in certain respects. Like they can declassify documents, they can authorize access to certain information to certain individuals. They can there's other types of things that's at the discretion of the executive. Although they can't like fundamentally change the legislation and they can't usurp the power of oversight that was awarded to Congress, when they work in concert, now it's like basically you can, like, the executive branch can defang these bad actors, and then the senators can go and actually enact the change. So I think this is a big deal. This potentially could lead to a cascade of very positive changes in the American government.
Right. And that's why, there are probably some arguments to be made about what could be important work that falls under USAID. But the fact of the matter is that it has been overshadowed by these
Yes.
bad actors.
Yes.
So if there are truly good pro-American programs, then let's move them to the State Department.
Exactly.
Let's make sure we have proper oversight.
Exactly.
Let's make sure that when senators and congressmen are asking for documents, that they provide them in a timely manner.
Yes.
Let's make sure the IGs are upfront and honest and wanting to be the watchdog over the agencies that they are charged with. I mean, this is not rocket scientist, and
Yes.
you're a rocket scientist,
But
Elon.
this is simply common sense, and being responsive to the electorate. And that's you just can't have these sort of institutions which are taking lots of taxpayer money, but then are not answerable to elected representatives of the public. Then they're totally disconnected. So I call it like we must move away from rule of the bureau to rule of the people, demos.
Mhm.
And I would think I'm hopeful that some of this creates momentum, Joni,
Yes.
with Senator
Mhm.
Ernst, with some of your colleagues as well in passing the REINS Act, right? I mean, half of
Oh,
this is
yes. Oh.
decades of Congress effectively just punting off the responsibility to avoid accountability. Not you, but many of your colleagues over the years. And hopefully, if this is a catalyst to say Congress and the Senate say we take the lawmaking power back to the elected representatives of the people, and get the kinds of things done that haven't gotten done for years, like the REINS Act and other mechanisms to say lawmaking power comes back to Congress.
Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the REINS Act, so I can't comment on that. But there was a recent decision in the Supreme Court called the Chevron Doctrine. Well, there was a Chevron Doctrine, but it got overturned. And this is something that does largely disempower agencies. And it's not, some people think it's a bad thing because they think, oh, it is like a form of deregulation. They think there should be a good amount of regulation. But at the end of the day, if regulation is needed, like this should be passed through Congress. This shouldn't be something at the whims of someone who is unaccountable. And there's a big issue with selective enforcement. So, for example, let's say even you trust the head of the agency, and even if you trust the head of the agency, what about the lower down people that they're not directly managing who decide, I just feel like investigating so and so? That should not be allowed. That should be, you shouldn't be able to like say, oh, I disagree with this person politically or for whatever other reason. And so therefore we're going to focus our attention on finding what they did wrong. That's not cool. That should not be allowed. And so of course that's always going to be a possibility under any system, but the more power that is granted to the agency to actually create the rules, the more they're going to be able to abuse that. And that's the agency is always going to be the part of the government that has the least amount of oversight because it's the one that needs to actually implement the rules. And it's as hard to oversee the implementation of the rules as it is to implement the rules themselves. So we need to be very skeptical in what we allow the agencies themselves to do. So in my opinion, we should not give agencies the authority to create any sort of rule or regulation. Everything should come from Congress. The Chevron Doctrine has basically said it's rolled back a lot of the authority that agencies have had to create the regulations for the agency, for the industries that they regulate. Instead, Congress needs to be explicit in what they mean. So that was a move in the right direction that happened recently at the level of the Supreme Court. But I don't know what the REINS Act is. It sounds interesting. I bet it's really good though.
I think that could be one of the best things to come out of all of this. I'm hopeful that happens this time. I know you're supportive. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like fundamentally, there's got to be a feedback loop to the people. You can't have these organizations that are just disconnected from the will of the people. Like I said, you just fundamentally do not have a democracy in that situation. You have tyranny of the bureaucracy, which is just inappropriate and needs to end.
By the way, Len, you know who's pumped up about you bringing everybody back to work is actually Muriel Bowser, mayor of DC.
Okay.
I mean, you're talking
Yeah,
about
exactly.
the homeless encampments. I talked to her maybe last month or month and a half ago, and that's a Democrat. Doesn't matter. It's basically the base principle of A, self-governance, and B, saving money and making sure that our buildings aren't being infested by homeless invasion, but instead is actually creating a thriving capital. I think is shockingly a bipartisan idea.
One thing I will say, I do think it's interesting how many government employees are remote. That could be concerning. I could see why they are harping on this, and so there's so many people not going into the office that entire buildings are getting overrun because they're basically abandoned. I can see how this is a problem. It doesn't strike me as a huge problem. In theory, I don't have a problem with someone being remote and working for the government. I think that to be categorically against that is a bit unreasonable. But what I will say is there's a different problem that we face. And the problem is that that there's just a lot of protections for government employees. And I know that sounds kind of crass. I don't mean to take advantage of anyone. I'm not advocating for that. I'm not saying I wish we could take advantage of them. I'm glad they have protections. But unfortunately, when in the narrow case, which seems to be happening, in which people are running rogue in some of these agencies and abusing their power, it does make it hard to correct. And unfortunately, these are just very important institutions. If there's one thing you take away from what I'm saying here, is that we don't need to do this because we are against these institutions. We need to do this because we are for these institutions. And these institutions cannot thrive if they are allowed to run amok by bad actors that want to abuse the lack of oversight. So we need to get these institutions in line. And unfortunately, there's a lot of protections for this interest group. And so if reform needs to be made, there's a lot of friction and a lot of forces that will basically prevent people from coming in and making a change. So that's a huge problem. Like, you can't just fire everybody. You can't just there's just a lot of things that you need to do to actually change the org chart of these organizations and to downsize them, because sometimes they're too big. Now, that's the problem. Now, there are only there's a small list of things that are acceptable to do in order to actually enact these changes. You can't, again, as I said, you can't just fire everybody, and there's a lot of things that you can't do, or you have to do, and it's hard to do. Now, one thing that you can do, though, is there are some things that are considered reasonable requirements for a job. So making someone go into the office is a reasonable requirement that actually would be permitted. They are permitted to mandate that. That's something that is considered reasonable, and it's not necessarily a protected right. And in doing that, you're kind of like shedding a lot of the workforce, and you're basically reducing the size of this special interest group. And because a lot of people will refuse, and if they refuse and stay employed, then they'll be fired, and you'll have grounds to fire them, and it will be appropriate. And if maybe they just quit instead, then they won't be there either way. So this is an effective way at requiring people to come to the office is an effective way at reducing the power of the deep state by lessening the number of constituents in that coalition. It's not to say that something is like fundamentally wrong in my personal opinion with people being remote and working for the government. I think that could be okay. But I do understand why people in general are against remote work. I think it's a debatable issue. For going to be realistic, in the long run, remote work is going to be a huge thing. Although at the present moment, there are a lot of reasons for companies to be in person. So anyway, let's keep watching or listening.
We give people the permission to come out as Democrats and say those things make sense, which I think we're seeing some of, which I think is cool.
No, you're absolutely right. The lack of people showing up for work in DC has actually made DC look like a ghost town. In fact, I mean, parts of DC, it looks kind of post-apocalyptic in parts of DC, because once people start coming to work, then the restaurants close down, then the stores close down, and then you just have boarded up stores and restaurants. And it destroys the small businesses in downtown DC. So, yeah, and there's a reason why people come to work and are more effective and more collaborative in one place. We're sort of rediscovering, why do you have offices? Oh, it turns out there's a reason. So. And the president has made his will clear. Like, return to work. That's it. End of story. So,
I think the first 2 weeks has been pretty massive.
Yeah.
And if it continues at that rate, I mean, even if you think about one of the big economic questions right now is the 10-year treasury rates, right? They're going up. Bond markets don't like our national debt. If this is the pace of what cutting looks like presented in a coherent plan, I'm hopeful that bond investors and credit investors in the U.S. government debt can at least say, okay, this is positive progress. which actually will bring down not only the costs that you're cutting directly, but also our interest rate costs.
Yes.
And I think that's really when we hit a virtuous cycle here, which I think could happen soon.
No, I agree. Actually, the bond markets do not currently reflect the savings that I'm confident we can achieve. And I'm giving a talk later this week with J.P. Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon, and that'll be obviously a financial audience, and really to say, look, if you're shorting bonds, I think you're on the wrong side of the bet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's basically
Seriously.
yeah. It's like really like basically the bond. I mean, there will be less debt needed as we stop wasting taxpayer money on crazy things like whatever the $50 million for condoms to Gaza, which I suspect didn't actually end up being condoms in Gaza. That's a lot of condoms, guys. What is that? A super tanker of condoms? I mean, how many do you need?
Oh my gosh, you guys.
That's a real line item. That's not a
Well,
this is like
I
is this fiction?
I don't doubt that that we did have those items going to Gaza. I don't know if it was that many, but this
No,
is
that was the line item. It was $50 million.
but this is
I'm pretty
this is the
sure.
problem.
Yeah.
Well, it was probably that line item, but God knows
Yeah.
what it
What was it really?
was.
Yes,
Right,
exactly.
exactly. But that's the problem we have with the budget.
So what they're pointing out there is that they spent 50 million, was it 50 or 15? I can't even imagine 50, but it's probably $50 million of condoms. But you think that's a lot of condoms, but we don't actually know how many condoms that was. They might have massively overpaid for each condom. That's the implication of what they're joking about.
And why,
Yeah.
when monies flow through all of these entities, we may have a line item that goes to, say, USAID, and or maybe goes through USAID to the United Nations, and then from the
Yes.
United Nations it goes to a subcontractor, and from that subcontractor it goes to someone else. It is a nightmare trying to follow that money and to
Yes.
understand what it's actually being used for. So again, going back to the transparency, we need to make sure that we have our eyes on it and that it's easily accessible. And
Yes.
maybe not just by members of Congress, but also the public as well.
I agree. It should be if it's public money being spent, it should be in full view of the public. But when they want to hide the stuff, frankly, it is the reality is because there's massive fraud and abuse. That's the reality. Nobody needs to hide something unless they have something to hide. Once in a while you've got something that's say an intelligence operation or like that actually needs to be classified, but that's a rare
Right.
situation. That's a tiny fraction of expenditures. The vast majority of these things, it's unfortunately a tremendous amount of fraud and abuse. Now, and what
I would object to that. I think a lot of the stuff is they are intelligence operations. I think there's a lot of evidence for that, and it's kind of like the method by which they fund these operations is by almost wasting the money in a strategic way. It's wasted, but really what it's actually what is embezzled to an extent, except it's like a sanctioned like a sanctioned form of embezzlement with plausible deniability and in coordination with intelligence agencies. And so I would say that a lot of this is for intelligence operations, but the question is, do we need to be doing these intelligence operations? And I'm okay if I had confidence in the system, I would be okay with them doing it, but I would like there to be oversight, and I would like there to be the possibility of actually changing this, and without it being an existential fight for the life of the politician who is trying to push for this. And we don't need a once in a generation or once in a lifetime politician to actually make change. It should be like everyone who's elected just straightforwardly can exercise their authority and oversight over these types of operations, and we can adjust course quickly with minimal pushback, and people should just be basically dispassionately following the rules and saying, oh, well, that's what the country wants, that's what we're going to do. And yeah, so that's how it should be.
The reason that is so extreme with the federal government is that the checks never bounce for the federal government. Okay, so the federal government can always make more money, and the problem is that in doing so, that's what creates inflation. Something that I really want to reinforce for people is that it's government spending that creates inflation. So when you see prices go up at the grocery store, it's because the government spent more money than it brought in taxes, increased the money supply, diluted the value of money, and made your paycheck go be less valuable. It meant like the prices are going up because of government induced spending, of government spending that results in inflation.
Okay, so I want to clarify this a little bit. So think about supply and demand. And so in supply and demand, there's two curves. One of them is supply, one of them is demand. So if you increase the demand, like let's say everybody wants to buy the new iPhone. Okay, so the demand goes up. And what that means is that therefore the price goes up because you're bidding. Like imagine you're on eBay and everyone wants this one thing that's being bid. So you put all your money in, you say, I want it. Everyone's bidding. The price rises and rises. That's demand. Okay, demand goes up, the price goes up. Now, supply, it's the opposite. Imagine that there are lots of the same thing on eBay and there's a lot of auctions. If you could bid with someone on one thing and then they bid up to a certain point, and then you realize, I'll just go buy this, I'll just bid on this other one. I'm not going to pay more for this. There's so many of these things available on eBay. I'm just going to go bid on this other one, right? So if there's a higher supply, the price is not going to be bid up as much by the demand. And therefore, the actually more supply decreases the price. This is an important thing, supply and demand. So increasing the supply increases the price. Decreasing supply decreases the price. Increasing demand, decreasing supply increases price, and increasing demand increases price. So supply, it directly affects the price. So now we have the money supply. There's a money supply. So every single thing in the economy that is sold for money is now paired against the money supply. So the relative quantities of that thing and money is going to be, in a sense, related to the price. And it's going to stem from the amount of people that want to trade dollars for that thing and vice versa. So there's going to be a supply and a demand curve. And the more that people have of a given thing, the more supply of that thing, and that is completely independent from the demand. Now that sounded very abstract, but let me kind of let me just try to explain what I'm talking about for a sec. So let's say that somebody had the first iPhone, Oh, nobody else had it. That would be not very prevalent, and there would be a lot of demand for that first iPhone. It would not be something that everybody has. Like the marginal utility that someone would get from also getting an iPhone, like let's say you could get the second iPhone, that would be super cool because there's not a lot of that. There's not an abundance of iPhones out there. Now that everyone has an iPhone, the idea of upgrading, getting the next iPhone, getting another iPhone, this is not a very exciting thing. Over time, the marginal benefit that you get from acquiring more of a thing, like basically you get less satisfaction from getting more of something that you already have. There's oxygen in the air all around us, for example. It's very abundant. I need oxygen to breathe, but I don't care to get more oxygen. I'm not going to pay for that unless I'm in like a lab setting or there's some reason that I need it. I'm not going to pay for that. So essentially, now relating this to inflation, we have to realize that when the government spends money, since the government is the issuer of the dollar, when the government spends money, that is putting a dollar into circulation. This increases the money supply. So now the amount of dollars in circulation increase. And that means that people don't want that dollar as much. They don't want the next dollar as much. It doesn't do as much for them. Like, I'm not saying they don't want more dollars. I'm just saying they don't want it as much as they otherwise would because there's more money around for everyone to have. And so what that means is that dollars are less valuable. So when dollars are paired with something like eggs or iPhones or whatever example of something that we're talking about, since there's relatively more money and more money is injected, the supply of money goes up. And therefore, the value of money in the trading pair against everything else goes down. So this increases inflation, meaning you have some money. And since the supply of money in the market is higher, the money that you have now each dollar that you have goes less far. So if let's say that they were printing millions of dollars, giving it to you, you would benefit from that because all that money is going in your pocket, and then you can go out and spend it. And maybe each dollar doesn't affect you as much, like it doesn't get you as much. Each dollar doesn't get you as much, but you have millions of more dollars. So on net, you benefited. But if you weren't someone who was a beneficiary of this new money creation, and the inflow of new capital didn't come to you, then you're going to be basically on the same salary with the same savings and all of the above, and you're going to have to try to stretch each dollar even further than before, and it's going to basically hurt you. And this is what's happened to a lot of people. So the money supply has increased because government has spent more. And as a result, the supply of money has gone up, and therefore the value of money has gone down. And that is what inflation is, the value of money going down. Now, there's more to this. Now, the economy is very complicated. You can't just say there's a lot of factors that affect the value of everything. Like fundamentally, it's true that as you increase the supply of money, the inflation technically occurs, but it's possible still that you could be experiencing deflation or some other type of price action because there's other factors that affect the value of the US dollar. Like for example, let's say that there's a global financial crisis and countries all around the world thought the US dollar is the most reliable asset. Let's buy that. Even if the US printed money, we could still experience deflation because essentially other countries could be having increased demand for dollars. And if there's an increased demand for dollars, it could increase the value of dollars. So even though there's an increase in supply, there could be an even higher increase in demand that offsets that supply. That's all details. But the point is that there is a relative connection between the increasing the money supply and increasing inflation. That's absolutely true. When the government spends money, it creates inflation relative to what there otherwise would have been. The dollar is devalued. But what I want to also posit is I want to take this one step further than Elon took it. There's another effect that's even worse for U.S. government spending than the fact that it creates new supply. What it does also is it decreases the supply of goods, which is in a sense increasing the price. So let me explain. You have somebody who is working in a factory and they're producing some kind of good. Let's say they work on a farm and this is a better example. They work on a farm and they're picking eggs up off the ground. Okay. And they have this land, they pick eggs up off the ground, they sell them at the market. There are eggs. They're selling these eggs. It's in the market, they're getting money. Now the government starts spending money, adding more money to the money supply. That would cause inflation. But what else does it do? Well, let's say that they have some sort of program for environmental conservation or something. I'm just making this up. It could be anything. Don't take it too seriously. So now this person says, I'm going to spend my time conserving the land and I'm going to destroy my farm. And instead I'm going to build a conservatory and I'm going to be a steward of this conservatory and I'm going to get this money from the government. So what happens is not only is that person getting taxpayer dollars and entering that into the money supply, causing more supply of dollars, which increases inflation. Also, what they're doing is they're producing less because it's easier and slightly more profitable to just get this basically unconditional money with no oversight and just no strings attached from the government. And this is a very bad incentive because it incentivizes people to leave productive work and enter into something that was centrally planned by the government and likely not optimal. And so what happens is now we have even less eggs. And so now it's like, remember that scenario we were talking about on eBay where you're buying that thing, but then you realize you could go to those other auctions? And you could just, since there was like a large supply in the market, you could just go and buy a different one instead of bidding up higher. Well, now that happens for eggs in the opposite direction. So now there's less options of who you can buy eggs from. And there's less farms producing eggs. And now more people are trying to get less eggs, and there's more money. So not only is there more money, the supply of money goes up, the supply of goods and services goes down. This creates even more inflation than you would think. And this is, of course, one of many different effects. That's all very complicated, but this is government spending is a very pervasive, it's a big problem. It causes a lot of problems in the economy. And I used to be very strongly against taxes. I now think taxes are mostly a rounding error. Only very high taxes cause bad incentives. Really, government spending is the thing that really holds us back from having very strong economic growth. Okay, let's continue listening though.
So now it's just very important to connect those dots, because people they sort of think like, well, maybe the supermarket's taking advantage of them, and they're not. You can look at the financials of the supermarket; they have like 2% margins. So it's got nothing to do with price gouging in the supermarket. It's just that the government spent too much. That increased the money supply and diluted the value of somebody's paycheck, and that's why the prices go up at the grocery store. So, but the good news is, if we solve government overspending, and the money supply grows at the same rate as the output of goods and services, there will be no inflation, and the prices in the supermarket now will be the same as the prices in the supermarket in a year. And that's a super big deal. And that really affects people's lives. That's what we're aiming for. And we're going to do everything possible to succeed in that goal.
And I think every dollar saved, I mean, the problem you just mentioned, Elon, is exactly why 10-year interest rates on U.S. Treasuries are persistently going up. Even if the government's trying to make them go down, the market's bidding them right back up.
Yes.
But conversely, for every hard dollar actually saved, right? So how many ever billion it was in the first 2 weeks, it's almost like a 2-to-1 saving, because that means that the interest rate that lenders to the U.S. government charge will go down.
Yes.
At a time when the interest rate payment itself on our national debt is one of the biggest items of our federal budget.
Yes.
So that automatically comes down for every one of these other savings.
Exactly.
And the only thing to be presented as a coherent plan, which I think you're already beginning to do, that alone, I think, will have a 2-to-1 savings for every hard dollar that's actually saved.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to reemphasize, just basically building on what they're saying, is that when you have a long-term view of the country's future, you're not just thinking about one election cycle, but you're thinking about many decades in the future, about our children. A little bit of cutting makes a big difference. I'm not saying that a little bit of cutting is sufficient to save us from our problems, but everything counts. And if you look at the power of compounding, and we're talking about interest rates here, it's if you could save a little bit earlier, like even just cutting a little bit right now, it can extend, it can delay a crisis in a good way, like perhaps give us time to actually avert a crisis. We should not poo-poo this. We should not look down on, it's a small amount cut. We should celebrate it. And one thing I think it's a good time to mention this too, is someone had posted basically that USAID is, I think, 0.7% of the federal budget. If that's true, that's a lot. And you can kind of look at that as like basically like a annual 1% tax to some extent on the entire budget of the United States that is basically embezzled by the intelligence apparatus, which is kind of wild. If that's true, that is a very huge take rate. That this is like the premium that they're extracting as like a hidden tax to enrich themselves at our expense. That is pretty crazy. So if we could even just cut that, I think it would make a big difference. But I also do want to say that the types of things that Elon can cut in Doge are only there are limitations to it, and there's a lot of entitlements and military spending that he cannot touch. And this is the bulk of our budget. And we also need to take a really hard look at those things. And I'm not sure exactly what to do. Like, entitlements is a much trickier thing. We need to have a really like unbiased conversation about that between Republicans and Democrats, and to figure out how we can, if there's something we can do. Like, people are very hesitant to touch these programs, and I understand, because their livelihoods depend on getting this money from the government, and people are already in this situation where they need these programs. So we don't want to put anyone in a bad situation, but at some point we need to intelligently consider what can be done to not ruin people's lives, but also to make these programs more robust and to fund them better. And so we need to revisit that. But I think it makes sense to do that after we cut the low-hanging fruit in the discretionary spending category. And then in terms of military spending, the DoD has failed multiple audits. There's like trillions of dollars missing. I mean, it's absurd. We need to get to the bottom of that. There's no way that's acceptable. That's just fundamentally unacceptable. You cannot have trillions of dollars missing, and you can't just classify everything and just not let people investigate it. That's something that the DoD has done as well. And it is just not okay. You can't do that. And like, yes, we need the military. We need the military to be strong, but come on. There's reasonable, and then there's some stuff that's beyond reasonable. If that was $100 billion, that's one thing. We're talking trillions of dollars missing from the DoD's budget, and they can't pass an audit. They can't even have a classified audit that they pass or something like that. They just can't even pass the audit. Like, there's no possible justification for not having good record keeping in a day and age of computers, and I mean, even pens and paper. There's not a good enough. There's no justification. Like, this stuff should just be recorded, and it should be available for those with the clearance. It's just fundamentally unacceptable, and heads need to roll, metaphorically speaking, of course. So, and hopefully we'll get this kind of increased oversight in the DoD as well. Okay, let's continue listening.
Saved, because you get the interest cost
Yeah.
next year that comes down as a consequence as well.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point you just made, Vivek. I just want to basically repeat that and reiterate that for the audience. When you actually get a double benefit when you bring down government spending, and it's a very important double benefit, which is that you stop inflation and interest payments go down, because the government is no longer borrowing money. So if the government is borrowing money, it's actually competing with everyone else to borrow money, and that drives up the interest rate. So
that's a great point. So not only does it divert resources in the private sector, when you spend money, you get people to spend effort doing things for the government instead of doing productive things. You also are crowding out other enterprises that are choosing not to do government projects and instead want to actually create things that people demand in the market, but you're crowding them out in the financial markets, and you're basically making it harder for them to get financing to build the things that they want. So there's other reasons why this stifles growth even further in the private sector.
So if we solve government spending, in a nutshell, your grocery bill stays the same, your mortgage payment goes down, and your car payment goes down, and your credit card bill goes down.
Exactly.
I mean, I think that's what the people of America want. I mean, obviously.
Yeah,
and
I
that's a
couldn't
good
agree.
goal.
I couldn't agree more, gentlemen. I mean, it's really important. And I'm sitting here tonight in Iowa, and I took my mom to church this morning, and man, everybody at church, we all kind of stand around afterwards and visit, and everybody's just really excited about the opportunity that the new administration is bringing, because costs are just through the roof for people in my neighborhood
Yeah.
in Southwest Iowa. I mean, it's hard. These are folks just getting up every single morning trying to do their job and do the best. And yet we as a government have failed to listen to their needs, and then to be able to cut the spending at the federal level, to make sure that their taxes stay low, and make sure that we are paying down our debt. No more deficit spending. Let's try and balance this budget as best we can. And we've heard plans from, Ron Johnson and others in the
Yeah.
Congress, but we've really got to get serious about it, because like every one of my constituents owes $67,000 to our national debt. That's
Yeah, and that's
outrageous.
and it's getting worse over time. So, really, if we don't do something about it, America's going to go bankrupt. That's a fact. So we must do something about it. It's imperative. Senator Mike Lee, I see you've joined. Would you like to add something to this conversation? I know you've got some great stuff as well to talk about.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks so much for the invitation. Look, I see this as an inflection point. Every 75 to 90 years in Anglo American history, we've seen a major upheaval. We had one in 1776, another one in 1861, another one in 1937. 2025,
Yeah.
we're due for one. And I think that's going to be the Doge revolution. And I think it has to be about much more than just the individualized, wasteful spending
Yes.
pet projects. At the core of all this is a fundamental ailment, which is that we've misconstrued the purpose of the United
Yes.
States government. It's supposed to be about just a small handful of things: weights and
Totally.
measures, trademarks, copyrights, and patents, regulating interstate
Exactly.
and foreign commerce, and
Yeah.
war.
No.
That's
I mean,
it.
I'm going to use this as an opportunity to inject my personal politics into this. Fuck patents, fuck copyright, abolish intellectual property. That's all I have to say. Let's keep listening, though.
The founders of the country
Well-
would blow their minds that the federal government has gotten so gigantic and is interfering with people's lives in so many ways.
That's exactly right. And then we've compounded the problem once we lost track of what the federal government's
Yes.
purpose is. We put the wrong branch in charge of the wrong responsibilities. We've been making most of our law, 100,000 pages a year, through the executive branch.
I want to caution people from bundling too many things along with this oversight, because I think this is a bipartisan systemic issue that we need to address. And I know that both sides of the aisle can get behind reform and basically making sure that there's transparency and auditability. And like a lot of people who would seemingly on the surface defend an organization like USAID and like just, whatever types of things are getting cut. Oftentimes, if they knew the details and they didn't listen to the kind of official narrative of it, but the people who were critical, that actually looked at the details and exposed what's going on. If people learn this stuff, I think pretty much everyone would agree that we need to gain control back and gain oversight back. When you start bundling it with a small government libertarian economic policy, something I'm very partial to, I think that ends up kind of diluting the message. I think there's two separate things. One is, let's end the funding of organizations that threaten our sitting Congress people. And basically any organization that is not transparent and resists oversight needs to be terminated. And we can make a new version of it where it's structured in a way where oversight is guaranteed. That's what we need to do. That should be bipartisan. And unfortunately, I think this is becoming partisan, but it should not be. That is infinitely defensible. Then there's a question around government spending. What is the right level of government spending? How can we get our budget balanced and cut waste, fraud, and abuse? Everyone wants to cut waste, fraud, and abuse, but there's like, is funding scientific research wasteful? Like, that's an open question. That's almost philosophical. There's going to be a lot bigger of a debate about that, and you're not going to be able to build a powerful coalition around that. So I'm not in favor of bundling those. I think it's an issue that should be discussed. I ultimately think I personally lean libertarian on that, but I'm also open. So I think it's good. I don't disagree, but I don't think it's politically smart to bundle these things together.
Which the Constitution says
Right.
you can't do. It says you cannot make a federal law unless you go through both houses of Congress and then give it
Yes.
to the president. So we've destroyed federalism and separation of powers. I think for Doge to succeed, we have to restore
Absolutely.
both of those. In my view, the best way to start is by passing the REINS Act, which would require Congress to enact those laws. And I think to get that passed this year, we've got to attach it to the debt ceiling bill. I
Sounds good
posted
to
on
me.
that on my base Mike Lee account.
I mean,
on X.
I absolutely agree with you 100%. I mean, what you're saying is just absolutely true. Um, there's vast amounts of federal regulation, which are de facto laws that are created. That it's an incomprehensible amount. It's literally no human could possibly even comprehend it. If you tried your hardest your whole life, a single human could barely understand a small fraction of the regulations and these regulations. If you look at them, there's millions of them, and it's not like any one regulation is the showstopper. But it's I mean, the way I sort of visualize it, it's like Gulliver. Like America's like Gulliver, tied down by millions of little strings, and we need to cut those strings and free the giant.
So there's a story called Gulliver's Travels, I think, and it's basically, I think what it is it's a normal sized guy, and he goes to some island, and then there is a bunch of small people, and then they think he's a giant or something along those lines, and they tie him up. I could be completely wrong about that, but I think that's what the reference is to. And the way I said it earlier is it's death by 1,000 cuts. And I guess going back to kind of what Mike Lee was saying, though, I do think these process oriented critiques are good, saying like this is not the appropriate process for passing legislation. We need oversight. I'm saying I like the stuff he's saying. I just was kind of commenting on that there's no need to let's try to make this as unpartisan as possible. We don't need to appeal to necessarily having a balanced budget because other people don't agree with that, and we don't need to like basically bundle it with a small government message. We can do those two things separately. Like let's first address this problem, which is like a very critical problem of preventing change. Like even if libertarians win and get to the Oval Office, then they're not going to be able to enact the change because of the deep state that's going to be working against them. So first defang the deep state, then go and actually debate about what the issues should be. And then at that point, hopefully you win. Hopefully you can get people to agree with you and you can make the right changes.
But
Exactly. That's exactly right. And those laws, which they are laws, those will put you in prison. Those will shut down your business. Those will ruin your life if you disobey them. No different than any other law.
It's totally crazy.
Well, it is exciting. Elon, isn't it true? President Trump has an executive order that says for every one new regulation that is put into place, 10 have to be rescinded.
Yes. Yes, and now of course the bureaucracy is going to try to game that by like having the one regulation sort of when like somebody says, well, I have everyone can ask one question, but then have a question in like 10 in like 10 parts. So it's possible to it's possible it's possible to game the regulation. So I think in addition to that executive order, which I certainly applaud, I think we need to go in and do wholesale removal of regulations. Like regulations basically should be default gone, not default there, default gone. And if it turns out that we missed the mark on a regulation, we always add it back in. These regulations are added willy-nilly all the time. So we just got to do wholesale spring cleaning of regulation and get the government off the backs of everyday Americans, so people can get things done, and the government doesn't have a sort of boot on the neck of the average Americans, which is because what are the the core founding values of this country? What has made America great? What will lead to further greatness is a focus on merit, that you get ahead as a function of your hard work and skill, and that you have freedom. It's free. It's the land of freedom and opportunity, and if the government has millions of regulations holding everyone back, well, it's not freedom. We've got to restore freedom.
And by the way, that's copied, multiplied, and 50-fold higher, where each of the 50 states then do the same thing.
Yes.
And many of these federal regulations are duplicative of the states doing the exact same thing, where the bureaucracies in each of the states are behaving like the federal government. So you think about the impact on people's lives, it just layers one on top of the other. And, like you talk about zero-based budgeting, I really like this concept of zero-based regulations, where the default is nothing and build back on top.
Nothing, exactly.
Right.
I mean, it used to be
that's what our founders wanted.
Yes, absolutely. It used to be like, and not that long ago, if you wanted to start a business, you just start a business. You just go, you just
No
open a
license.
store. You can just do it. The government's not like prying into every part of like get the license for this, do the license for that, get 17,000 permits. I mean, like you look at LA and like how it's like, I mean, when I lived in LA, it was hard to get a permit to remodel your kitchen. And now with this disaster that's happening in LA, this terrible tragedy, just the sheer number of permits required to build a house are staggering. Basically, they've made it illegal. So, like, but we got to start somewhere on the regulatory front, and certainly, at least if we address federal regulation, then people can choose to from one state to another and still remain in America, and move to the state that has less regulation, where the government is less, gives you more freedom, and you've got that competition between states. You've got that federal system that was meant to be the case. That was how the country was created. Like, let the states compete, and if your state is 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 being oppressive, you can go to a neighboring state and live there. That's the whole idea.
One issue with this idea about expiring regulations, and I am in favor of it, because broadly I'm in favor of it because basically, if you look, we never do remove regulations, and we only add them. This is just empirically true. So clearly, not every idea that someone has is going to be good. And given that we're not reassessing them and actually going back and repealing them, we really need to take a different approach, because we know that we're doing the wrong thing. I mean, that cannot be possibly the right thing to do. Sometimes we get it wrong. We should go back and adjust it, but that never happens. Therefore, we know we're doing the wrong thing. But more broadly, though, I do have a slight criticism of this, because even if regulations are repealed, they can be renewed. And they can be renewed in a way where there's basically zero scrutiny of what's in them. And so, like, this is what happens with like the National Defense Authorization Act. And there's certain acts that are time bounded and they expire after a certain amount of time, and they keep getting renewed. And this is a big problem. And basically, they're very giant bills that have a bunch of very unpopular policy positions in them, but yet they keep getting all the politicians basically vote for them. And the issue is that the politicians are pressured into supporting this, even though if you ask their constituents, they would not be in favor of these types of things, like mass surveillance. Like, I don't think people like that idea. And if they do, it's because they're completely uninformed. And basically, there's this kind of collusion between those in Congress, those in the deep state that want this authority. And so they kind of push the people in Congress to vote a certain way, and they coordinate actions against them if they don't authorize this authority to them. And then they have people in the media who don't expose this, don't make a big deal out of this, and kind of cover it up, make it try to seem like it's not a big deal. And there's basically a bunch of parties that are interested in perpetually passing this legislation. And then there's all these subtle things, like there are the way that elections are regulated makes it harder for certain people to enter the election. And there's certain who does the media give coverage to? Like, there's all these small things that make that allow those in power in the deep state to exert influence to make the political landscape less competitive and to put pressure on those that are elected as politicians. And so again, I just see this as, I'm not saying that I have all the answers here, but I see this as a very concerning state of affairs, in the way that basically, even if you are good at repealing things, or like you can get these systemic changes that sound good where you automatically repeal legislation, if you don't solve the underlying problem of literally on the stream, we heard a senator was threatened by USAID persons. And we're going to go through another example of that shortly after we finish this Spaces stream. And if we don't address this problem, I could easily see basically a big, massive bill that just renews everything, and it just might say, like, you could either say like everything is renewed, or it could say, or it could just put all the text again, and basically everybody would just vote on it, and they would be pressured to vote on it. And if they didn't, then everyone else would basically agree to cut out all of the things that are good for their constituents, and and basically screw them over. So it's that's not sufficient to fixing the problem. First, we need to get at these corruption. We have to solve this corruption problem essentially, and then we can address these other things. But I think, yes, I think expiring regulations is a good idea. And if you have and even if you're progressive and you really want more oversight over corporations and industry, it's still beneficial to have expiring regulations. And the reason is because if you are like a pro-labor advocate, then you believe that like this is like a populist position where the people, like most working people, will support it. And you really have to wonder, why have you not won a lot of elections? Well, I think a good reason is because of the subversion of the political process and the way that basically opposition candidates are crushed, and the way that those that go against the system are systematically attacked. That has to have a very negative effect on those that are advocating for your position. So I think this is something that we can get at from a bipartisan standpoint. Let's make this a fair playing field. Let's eliminate the corruption. Let's have transparency. Let's have things work the way that we think that they work, even if that way isn't the ideal. Let's at least follow the original rules. Let's get to a system that follows those rules in a fair way and that we can verify and prove. And once we're there, then let's debate and actually make changes if needed to the system. That's what I advocate.
Federalism is the answer,
Yes.
no doubt. But you got two things going for us right now in the country that haven't happened in a long time. One is a willing president, Donald Trump, who actually
Yes.
believes everything that all four of us have just said,
Exactly.
which is a beautiful thing.
Donald
And
Trump
without that, it
opposed
wouldn't
him,
be
by the way.
possible.
Let me just say,
Yeah.
the more I've gotten to know President Trump, the more I like him. Frankly, I love the guy. He's great.
Yeah, and
So-
he's full bore more than any president we've had since the creation of the administrative
Yes.
state. So I think that's number one. And number two is, thanks to him, actually in his first term, you got a Supreme Court that 6-3 vehemently agrees with everything we've just said.
Yes.
And so I think it's possible.
Yes.
now,
In fact,
it's actually possible.
yes. In fact, if it's not possible now, it'll never be possible. This is our this is our shot. This is the best hand of cards we're ever going to have.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't take advantage of this best hand of cards, it's never going to happen. So we're going to do it.
I agree.
Now or never.
Yeah, now or never. And I do think you're right, Vivek. I mean, with the first administration of President Trump, and kind of lessons learned through that administration, and now in the second administration, the stage is set, and he knows how to aggressively tackle a lot of these issues that have plagued us for years. And folks ask me, "Oh, Trump's, first 100 days, what is that going to be like?" And I'm like, "Forget the 100 days, folks. It's going to happen a lot faster than that." And he needs to continue to be aggressive. So, and we all know there's going to be bumps along the way. Of course there are, because we're moving at the speed of relevance here. But we've got to get in there and make an impact so that our constituents can actually see the benefit, because we've got a tough mid cycle or mid presidential year election coming up
Sure.
in 2026, and we cannot lose the House or the Senate, because then the president will be dead in the water.
Yeah, but
And
absolutely.
we just need to move out.
Well, that's I
Move
mean,
out.
yeah. I mean, I think that's really the people will judge the performance and whether actually we got things done and whether things were better off, and in 2 years. And I think if the people feel like, yeah, they're better off, the country's working better, they feel like there's the reward for hard work is there, that their their paychecks going further than it used to, that their standard of living is better, their mortgage is lower, the credit card bills are lower, the prices at the stores are the same, they haven't like risen dramatically. Then I think there's no problem. We will win the next election. The people will reward that performance. So I think but that's what needs to happen. But I think if it does happen, there will be a Republican win in the midterms, and which is usually which is unusual. But I think if we make these goals happen, I think we'll actually have an increased majority in the House and Senate, and be able to continue to as the president would say, make America great and even greater. So
Love it.
The case, the blanket that, I mean, Elon, you and I have talked about this. Mike Lee, you and I have talked about this, but might as well just say it here as well. Is when in doubt, push it to the states, right? If there's some doubt about, okay, well, we're not sure about this regulation. You got a whole nuclear energy framework at the federal level. You have an entire one in each of the 50 states. Same thing for spending or some other program. Are people going to really suffer if this is taken away? Federalism is the answer. Just push it to the states. And, I think that's a big part of, obviously what I'm looking to do next, but it's governors across the state, whatever, let them bear the load of what the federal government needed, because that's actually what the founders envisioned in the first place. I know, Mike, you've been a crusader for this since day one.
No, that is right. That is the whole reason I ran for this job 15 years ago. The fact is, the people of our country are upset. They're upset about our government because it manages things poorly. And what a lot of people are starting to grasp is that it's not just a matter of changing from the red team to the blue team and back to the red team and making sure you've got better personnel in there, because better personnel won't make those same mistakes and won't fund the stupid studies about the drunk gerbils on a treadmill.
yeah,
The point is, it's poorly run, because when the US government is doing all kinds of things that it's not supposed to be doing, that should be left to the states or to the people, in the words of the 10th Amendment, it becomes very poor, very bad at doing a few things that it is supposed to do. You can't be good at running the Pentagon and at making sure that traffic lanes, the lines of commerce are open, when you are doing all kinds of things that the federal government wasn't built to do. We're using it as the wrong tool. There are very few things that the federal government currently does that the federal government is itself uniquely equipped and constitutionally authorized to do. That's what we've got to get back to. And that's why this is going to be a painful, radical, transformational change in many circumstances. But it's going to be a huge relief to the American people. Once we get through the initial shock, and once we get through the stage where the media is telling us that the sky is going to fall, dogs and cats living together in the streets, apocalyptic stuff, once they realize that's not true, they're going to feel this huge burden lifted. That's what we want. We want a better future for America. We can't get to
absolutely.
returning to our founding document.
Okay, so I'm going to give you my take on how I think this is going to play out. So basically, well, I really can't make a prediction at this point 4 years from now. So who's going to run in the next election, 2028? I don't know. How is that going to play out? I don't know. But what I do perceive is that the Democratic Party is in disarray right now. It is a disaster. Basically, this was a huge blow to it. This loss, it was embarrassing, and just basically the narrative about Joe Biden being all there mentally when he clearly wasn't, and then the embarrassing debate where it got exposed as having had substantial decline, and then the fact that everyone just kind of moved on, pretend like it didn't happen, and then pumped up Kamala, hyped her up, and then she just was not popular, and in the process, bypassed the possibility of having any sort of election. And even if you want to say, oh, well, they just did the best thing they could in the moment, they have a history of these super delegates overriding like the Bernie Sanders supporters and all this stuff. And this goes back, and it's clearly a very corrupt party, the Democratic Party, and nobody's happy with it. And it kind of just, it's, like a lot of the traditional people in that coalition are now leaving. There's like, for example, tech is an example of people that are successful in making contributions to society by building incredible technology and working hard. This is the kind of person you want in your coalition, and they are largely exiting that, and they're going to work with Elon and with Trump. And so there's going to be what's called a realignment, where these parties, they're going to remain relevant, they're going to remain intact, but they're going to have a different constituency than they used to. And right now, the Democratic Party is having trouble finding what that constituency is. And unfortunately, in my opinion, I'll do a video on this some other time, but I think that they've kind of they've been very much culturally anti-success. And so I remember back in the election when Joe Biden was running against Trump, he was one of many candidates who was being considered for that position. So there were people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, Mike Bloomberg, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar. There's some other guy, I forget what his name, Tom Steyer, Andrew Yang, all these people were running. And it was really interesting to see how the Democratic Party would attack those candidates that were successful. Like basically they punished Tom Steyer and Mike Bloomberg for being billionaires. They said that was bad. Howard Schultz considered running. They said that was bad. We don't like you. You're a billionaire. Then they didn't like that Pete Buttigieg worked at McKinsey. They didn't like that Elizabeth Warren, went to law school and was like a law professor, and like anything that you basically would say, oh, that's impressive, they would kind of use that against the candidates. And really like the most pure best candidates were people like Bernie and Joe Biden, who had basically been politicians their entire life and just had done activism. They hadn't had any sort of career success. And really the degree to which someone had career success was the degree to which they were skeptical of them. And in that process, I really saw the writing on the wall that this party was going to fall apart, because basically they hated success. And so then throughout the party, they kept selecting those that were incompetent and innumerate. And it just really goes to show just the results of the last election. It was just an absolute disaster. And so they need to completely restructure on an organizational basis, and they need to get their messaging straight, and they need to figure out who is going to support them. And so that is what's the challenge ahead. So I do give the slight advantage to the Republicans, but I don't see this as a guaranteed victory by any means. I think there's a lot of people who are upset by Trump and upset by Elon, and there's a lot of people who just are still listening to media that is very much against Trump. And I think the media has lost credibility. I think podcasts are going to be a very important thing in the future for how people consume information. And so the media is losing its influence, but it's not dead. And it really comes down to what happens in these next few years. And so if we can end wars, I think that will be very popular. If we have more peace globally, that will be very popular. If we can, the tricky thing is that you don't really control the economy, and the economy is a beast that cannot be easily manipulated or controlled. And so if the economy goes down, it just remains to be seen. It remains to be seen what happens. I think there are some cheap tricks that can be done. Like if the Fed lowers interest rates, that could temporarily boost the economy and create an illusion of economic prosperity. It's kind of a cheap trick, but that could keep Trump in power for it could help the perception of Republicans going into the midterms. And but then that would require the Fed to cooperate and actually lower interest rates, which they may not want to do, because there is a good argument to be said that that's not the best thing for the economy. I'm not taking a position on that. I'm just saying that the Fed is supposed to be independent, and so they may not listen to Trump. And so Trump might try to get a Fed chairman that wants to lower interest rates in order to help him keep power after the midterms. And like Elon himself said, that we might have to go through a bit of pain before we get the benefit of these cuts. And that's what's called austerity, cutting. And it's paired with kind of like hard times. So doing this is not going to necessarily just make the prices of eggs go down. It could actually lead to some hard times when you're cutting things. In the long run, it's good. But when you're focused on short-term elections, that's that's the problem, is that you can lose power in the middle of what you're trying to achieve for the long term, and then all those plans can be thwarted. And so essentially, I think that it remains to be seen. I hope that it works out so that these types of changes can be continued to be implemented after the midterms, and hopefully not reversed. That would be the worst, if the progress that Elon and Doge are making get reversed after, maybe not after 2 years, but after 4 more years, if Democrats take back the presidency. It's also interesting just to think about how the Republican and Democratic Party are going to shape up in the future. Once the Democratic Party figures out what its coalition is going to be, it could be a formidable threat to the Republican Party. And the Republican Party still could shift. Like, these people from tech that are currently in the Republican Party might not stay in the Republican Party in the end. Like, what has happened is there was this legacy establishment with Bush and Romney and Cheney and just, all those guys. And they are pretty much on the outs. They were not invited to the Republican National Convention. People don't really like them. They've been completely discredited in the eyes of most Republican voters. So this is really a new party that's being shaped in the image of Trump and Elon and Vivek and all of these people, who are pretty interesting and exceptional people, especially Elon. But nothing is settled yet. And the Democratic Party still is the party of Biden and Pelosi and Obama and all these traditional Democrats. And so they're going to also go through a transformation once things get bad enough for them, and they really see that they need to evolve to survive. They're going to have a different face. And that's where things are going to get very interesting. And I think there's a lot it remains to be seen where the chips fall in terms of how these coalitions shape up and who ends up being dominant at the end of these 4 years. So let's keep listening to their talking.
Exactly. Couldn't agree with you more. And I'm actually pretty optimistic that we're going to make it happen. This is I think it's going to happen. So the progress is good so far, and if it keeps accelerating, then I think it's going to be awesome. So, the cost of excess regulation on economic growth and prosperity is like really underestimated. Like, if you basically don't even allow people to do things, like make it illegal, well, you can't, the builders can't build. America is a nation of builders. But we need to give the builders permission to build. And that's really what deregulation is all about. Just letting people do things.
And there's another element to this, which is selective enforcement, which is if you're basically pissing off the government, they can decide to enforce regulations on you selectively. And basically and if there's a complex enough web of regulations, they can basically, there's a saying, show me the man and I'll find you the crime, or something along the lines, or find me the man and I'll show you the crime. And essentially it's saying that if you have prosecutorial discretion, you can investigate anyone and find anything, or find something on anyone, and you can use that to pressure them. So that's why it's key not only to reform regulation, which I know Elon bumps up against a lot, so it's very important to him. And I agree that it's important, but also to make sure that the government is acting morally and ethically and transparently and in the way that we intend for it to act, not basically using it as a vehicle for exerting or pushing for a political agenda.
Things.
Deregulation and meritocracy go hand in hand. Actually, they're two sides of the same coin.
Yep.
And you want to actually measure Doge's success is not just the deficit reduction. I don't think that that's the sole metric, although it's a really important one. And bringing down the national debt and the interest payment costs as a consequence, that's really important. But actually, a lot of these benefits of delivering economic growth won't be measured in this year's deficit reduction, but will be measured in long-run GDP growth, long-run economic growth, long-run prosperity of the country.
Yeah.
And I think that's equally important, in my opinion.
I'm optimistic that we'll see a material impact in FY26, which starts in October.
Mhm.
You know, a lot of the stuff I think we'll make significant gains in FY25, government financial year 25, which ends in
I'm going to get out of my seat to just turn on the light because it's getting dark here, but I'm going to keep playing this and I'm listening on my headphones.
September. And but I think that like we're the sort of metric we're tracking, sort of kind of startup style, or just and we're going to be posting more and more detail on the Doge website and Doge handle on X is just in so people can see in detail, like this is where we're seeing the delta in spending between current spending and government financial year 25, which or 26, which starts in October. And that number is really, you know, we think it's at this point over $1 billion a day, maybe 2 billion, maybe approaching 3. Um, and uh, and I think we can take $1 trillion out of the deficit next year. Like, you know, obviously this is going to require, you know, strong support from the president, but thus far we certainly have that, and also support of the Congress, and support, and also
$1 trillion out of the deficit would be crazy. That means so basically the deficit is the differential between how much we're spending and how much money we have. So, I mean, what he's basically saying, I mean, that by taking $1 trillion out of the deficit, that means decreasing spending by $1 trillion. That's another way of saying that. So you have to make $1 trillion of cuts. Now, there may be some accounting trick that he's doing because he's also taking into account interest payments. So perhaps you make slightly less than $1 trillion of cuts and there are interest savings or something along those lines. So that's totally possible, but it's still, I mean, those are still payments. So that would be really amazing if he was able to do that. And I'm wondering if that will require legislation. I'm assuming it must. I don't think that Doge alone can do that.
also hopefully support from the judiciary as well. But
That is interesting, though. That is one way of getting things through, is to by actually trying the legality of certain things. Instead of actually getting people to vote to repeal, you can actually try the legality. There's other ways of basically ending certain programs through executive order and stuff like that. So you don't always need to actually pass legislation in order to close down spending necessarily.
But it's I mean, basically the goal in a nutshell is pretty straightforward. It's like we have a $2 trillion deficit, which is far in excess of economic growth. If we can get that deficit in half, from 2 trillion to 1 trillion, and we can get the economic growth to match that 1 trillion growth in the money supply, that means there will be no inflation, and also that interest rates will drop, credit card interest down, mortgage interest down, car payment interest down, and prices at the store stay the same. That is a great outcome for people, and I think we can,
Yeah.
It's amazing.
I think we can do
Yeah.
it.
I think
You know,
we
people
can
say it's
too.
unrealistic.
No,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think
People
we
say it's
can.
unrealistic. But you know, the funniest part about this is just the hard number.
The way she said that, I think we can. She didn't sound very convinced. I don't know if like inflation is driven by more factors than just that, but I get what he's saying. I mean, this could be very positive.
Number here, and the four of us here know the answer, but for people who are listening, it might be eye-opening. Where, like, how much money did the federal government actually spend last year? Not the mumbo jumbo, not discretionary this and not just like how much did the federal government spend last year? It was about 7 trillion. It was just under $7 trillion. How much did we spend in this like ancient time period known as 2019? Okay,
Right, not that long ago.
like this year called 2019, not that long ago. We all kind of remember 2019.
5.5.
It was 4.5 trillion. It was less than
Oh,
4.5, 4.45, less than about $4.5 trillion.
Exactly.
That's $2.5 trillion right there.
Yes.
So if you just go back to 2019,
Totally.
that's $2.5 trillion.
Exactly.
Which is insane, actually, that they think that that's impossible. As 2019 was not that long ago.
Right.
And
Precisely.
you know, it should
Precisely.
be
And
achievable.
nobody thought that
Yeah,
there was
right, exactly.
an apocalyptic hellscape underway in
Yeah,
2019.
2019 was pretty cool,
it's like,
actually. I like
think we can all
2019.
remember
Well-
2019 was not some nightmarish hellscape. Exactly. In fact, we got along
And Mike,
things were just fine in 2019.
Mike can vouch for this too, though. What we saw with COVID, as we were pushing all those dollars out the door, they started a lot of programs with those dollars, and people just continue to expect those dollars to come, even though we're way beyond COVID.
Yes.
Way beyond
Well,
COVID.
so often people will say like, well, you can't reduce deficit that much because what about all the entitlement spending? Like there's the sort of guaranteed spending. Well, but here's the thing: and especially during COVID, as you're alluding to, there was actually a massive growth, a massive increase in the amount of fraud and waste in entitlements, with like fake people like collecting
Hmm.
Social Security, like bogus payments to Medicare. The level of fraud is actually staggering. Um, and it just cutting back on that. And by the way, it's not just even U.S. fraud rings. I don't know if people realize this, but there's the estimates I've seen are between 100 and 200 billion dollars in foreign fraud rings. There are professional foreign fraud rings operating that are taking somewhere between 100 and 200 billion dollars a year of U.S. taxpayer money out of the country.
Wow. 100 to 200 billion dollars a year. That's a lot. So if we're talking about $1 trillion, cutting $1 trillion of a deficit, that's 10 or 20% of that goal. If you could eliminate fraud, that is crazy, actually.
And a lot of people realize that. And like, so the fraud in that case isn't even going to American fraudsters. It's going somewhere in other countries.
Well, Elon, I sent that example to you the other day. Sat down with a friend of yours, works in ID
Yeah.
technology, and he showed me that video of a deep fake where it was a Chinese scammer trying to receive U.S. federal government benefits. Just
Yes.
it's outrageous. But so much of that money that Chinese scammers are taking out of the pockets of our taxpayers.
Yes, and I mean, there's really there's American entitlements are being defrauded by people not even in the U.S. In from many other countries because the fraud controls are so weak on the entitlements programs. The due diligence is so bad that it's actually possible to operate hundreds, if not thousands, of fake people and get entitlements uh, sent to you that you then take the money out of the country, out of the United States. This is happening as we speak. It's utterly insane. Um, so this is why I'm actually quite optimistic that $1 trillion can be saved just by addressing waste, fraud, and abuse. Um, it it's it's I while it's a lot of work, I don't think this is some
That's interesting.
insurmountable task. I am confident it can be done, and we'll do everything in our power to make it happen.
And also, I mean, I don't know if he's even going to have access to like the Pentagon and stuff, but I mean, there is a lot of clear. I mean, again, where did those trillions of dollars go in the audit? I mean, I think there's a lot of room there too, and that can make a big difference. But one thing I will say is, it's really shocking to hear how much the deficit has grown. I didn't know we were spending $7 trillion per year. I mean, I almost want to double check that because that just sounds so crazy. That is a lot to be spending. It just goes to show how much more we need to cut. $1 trillion today is not the same thing as $1 trillion 5 years ago.
And I think that'll be if we succeed. And I hope I'd like to ask for the support of the American people because we're going to get a lot of opposition. Because let me tell you, like from the what I remember most from one of the things I remember from the PayPal days was that who complains the loudest is the fraudsters. Okay, so when somebody was trying to commit fraud to PayPal, where we would see the most amount of righteous indignation, like it would be like immediate over the top righteous indignation was from the fraudsters, not from honest people. Because honest people are like, oh, I think there's something wrong with my account. I wonder what's wrong. Let me inquire. But the fraudsters will come at you immediately. It's like a tell.
Yeah, and there's called a field of economics called public choice economics, where you analyze the incentives surrounding the government's actions. And one of the things that you learn from that is that basically a special interest group that has a concentrated interest in one certain thing remaining the way that it is will work really hard to ensure that that thing does not change. Whereas everyone else who just slightly gets scammed by it or doesn't benefit or loses out from it, they just lose out a little bit, so they don't really care. So no one's going to fight so hard about fixing every little problem in the government. But those that benefit from these problems, it's a huge cash cow for them. So they're willing to put a ton of resources into perpetuating it. So now imagine that you are someone who is using Social Security or expecting to use Social Security, and you want to make sure that Social Security benefit, you get your benefits. If you hear that someone's kind of coming after it and going to like be asking you a lot of questions and all these things, you're going to naturally be skeptical of this. And that's totally understandable. I'm always like, I don't want to get like audited by the IRS. Like, this sounds like a pain, right? So like, I don't have benefits, but when they say like, oh, we're going to have less IRS agents, I'm like, okay. I mean, I'm not going to complain if there's a lower chance of an audit. Now, is that actually the right policy? I don't know, but it's like just something you don't want to deal with, basically. So either way, the point is it makes sense that somebody would be maybe biased slightly against doing a reform. If you are depending on entitlements, you would be biased against a reform. So now imagine that you are depending on Social Security. You kind of are like, I'd rather they don't reform it. I don't want them to ask questions. Like, I'm doing everything right, so I don't have anything to worry about. But I don't want to, I don't want to have to like fill out more paperwork or whatever. That is like. Now, when that person then encounters a scammer or a fraudster that's embezzling money from the system, who's being loud and vociferous about their opinion that this should not be closed, they're going to think that they are just another law-abiding citizen just like them, and that they're basically on their same team, and they're going to basically they're going to identify with that person. And when they do that, the issue is that it will cause they're going to kind of form a coalition, and then those that are benefiting are going to kind of be like elevated as leaders in this movement to preserve this thing. And then there's going to be a lot of grassroots support for maintaining the status quo and not actually putting these checks. So it's really dangerous to it's dangerous when there is a false air of legitimacy given to these people who are basically screaming that we should not end this fraud and abuse. We need to don't get, basically, if you find yourself in that situation, don't get tricked by these people. Don't get tricked by the people that are saying it's so bad. They are being loud and vocal, and they hope that since you slightly empathize with the situation, that you're going to now join their coalition and give them power. But really what they're doing is they're not the same as you. They are benefiting from this system, and you are not. And so don't join them. When people say like we need transparency in government, that is the right side. That is what we need. And even if you value our government's ability to keep things secret, you still should want transparency, because we need to, at certain points, we need to cut things back and make sure that everything is happening above board so that we can have a healthy level of trust in our institutions. And if we don't do that, we're setting ourselves up for failure down the road. Let's keep listening to the last 4 minutes here.
That someone's actually doing fraud, because the level of sort of faux outrage is way over the top. So we're going to get a lot of that. A lot of people claiming with fake outrage, claiming that they're sort of, sort of a single mother with kids just trying to feed them. Meanwhile, it's like some dude operating a fraud ring out of another country, actually. That's what the kind of thing we'll see. So really, I would like to ask for the support of the American people in pursuit of this goal, and bearing in mind that we're going to see some pretty outrageous stuff from the fraudsters as we crack down on fraud. They're going to be the loudest complainers. So, to anyone in America listening to this, your support in pursuit of this goal is very much appreciated. Thank you.
Oh,
Cool.
absolutely. And
Awesome. I think that basically is all the content of this Spaces. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I was going to cover this one last thing. Let's see here. If we go here, there's this episode that Candace Owens covered. She covered the case of Matt Gaetz, and so Matt Gaetz was originally going to be the Attorney General in the Trump administration. And when he was nominated for this position, there was huge backlash at the thought of his nomination. And basically, he ended up getting forced out. And now there's Pam Bondi, who I think has been confirmed, but she basically took his place and he dropped out. But essentially, he has been subjected to a blackmail scheme, that have very strong ties to the CIA. And I'm not going to react to this video today because this stream has already been basically 3 hours. So I don't want to go longer than this. But long story short, this is a sitting US congressman who on TV made credible allegations that he has been blackmailed. And this is something that he's gone to the FBI about, and then they have corroborated this, and there's a lot of evidence for this. He has been blackmailed. There's very good reason to believe that this was in connection to the efforts of the CIA to get back a hostage from Iran. So there's this hostage in Iran, and the CIA have been, because he is a former CIA operative, they wanted to get him out. But in order to do that, they need to pay a $20 million ransom. But they don't have the funds for that. So I'm just summarizing what happened in this, what she covers in this episode. This is a very interesting episode. What I'm going to do is I'm going to add this to my sources playlist. So if you go on my channel, there is a sources playlist, and you'll be able to see all the sources of the videos on YouTube that I react to. Now, unfortunately, this X space was not on YouTube. This was on X, so I'm not going to add that there. But I will add this so you guys can go watch it. But basically, what happened is, so they needed $20 million to get this hostage. And they didn't have $20 million. So they needed to find other means, a plausibly deniable way to route funds to pay that ransom. And basically their plan was to extort Matt Gaetz and his family, such that Matt Gaetz' father, who is very wealthy, would pay them $20 million. And then they would use that to pay the ransom. And so what they did was they fabricated charges against him of sexual in nature, and they constructed a fake investigation into him, and they basically said, we're going to end your life and career if you don't comply with this. And what Matt Gaetz did is he just went on TV and said, I'm being blackmailed, and you can look at the clips and look at the evidence here. It's well documented. It's a very interesting story, but the degree to which it's true, I mean, I encourage you guys to research it and get back to me and let me know. The evidence I've seen is very compelling. But regardless of whether that's true, the fact that these types of questions come up and up time again, where our sitting politicians are being threatened and coerced by people within the government, the fact that this allegation keeps coming up, and there's credible reason to believe that this keeps happening, it's just beyond unacceptable. And if there's just one thing that we could end, is just that. I just don't want this type of abuse of power to continue. I want us to be able to speak our minds politically and debate the issues and then enact whatever it is. And if everyone disagrees with me, I will go along with it, as long as it's fair. And I just want it to be fair. So that's my plea to you. Bravo to Elon Musk for everything that he has done in order, just so far with Doge, and it seems like he's going all in on this, and it's amazing to see. He has done what nobody else could do. This has been remarkable. And I am very hopeful for the future. So I will keep you guys posted on any updates that I find with this. If you like this kind of content, I focus a lot on tech and how tech influences society. So please, I'm a new creator. I make streams every single day. I make lots of content, so you'll never run out of things to listen to. So please, subscribe, like, comment.